right, welcome aboard, everyone. Joe Holbrook here. Glad to see a few of you are able to show up today for the Google Cloud Digital Leader Certification Training. So I have, let's see, on the phone today or on the Zoom today, I have Maurice, Roy, and Sachin. Welcome aboard. So quick introduction, Joe Holbrook here. I'm the Meetup manager for Google Cloud, also the blockchain group here in Jacksonville, also the owner of TECHCOMMANDERS. We're an online training platform. And basically, we're mainly focused, of course, on cloud, blockchain, IT security, and a few other things, but mainly that's really where we're at. Now, as far as today's schedule, will probably be going until about maybe noon to 1 o'clock, depending on questions. Normally, when I would teach this class on, for other platforms or my own, usually it's about a 7-hour class. We're going to keep it about 4 hours, and you'll also get the content to download. And also, too, there's plenty of time for questions. So that'll be the goal for today. Let's go ahead and go through a quick introduction. For those that just joined, there's a GitHub repository link in the chat. You can go ahead and download the presentation, practice questions for the exam as well. Okay, let's see. Let's go ahead and do a quick introduction. Let's see. Jorge, would you like to do an introduction? Let people know who you are, where you're from, what you're doing, anything else? Okay, I guess he jumped out. Edgar, how are you?
Hey, hello, how are you?
I'm good, good. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great, thank you. So, are you local to Jacksonville or from out of town, or what makes you want to join in Google Cloud today?
I am from Colombia. I am in Medellin.
Great. Okay.
I want to know about Google Cloud. I have some experience with Azure and AWS, and I don't work before in GCP, right?
Okay. Okay. So you're an Azure guru. Okay, great. All right. So I'll correlate a few things with Azure to Google Cloud while we go through to give you some additional insight. All right. Thanks for joining. And Maurice, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing fine. How about yourself?
Great, great, great.
So I'm Maurice. I actually live in Lakeland, Florida.
Oh, great.
I'm interested in learning about the cloud. I actually currently work in the IT field for a managed service provider. I'm a marketing coordinator. I've been doing it going on a year now. And I just been wanting to expand in the IT field. So right now I've just been mainly doing like marketing, social media marketing and all that, and putting together instructional videos and stuff for different IT things. The latest one that I did was an explainer video going over the difference between cloud services for MSPs versus Azure, and there was one other cloud service that we were comparing them to, but that'll be going up on YouTube tomorrow.
Oh, wow, great. Yes, hilarious, because I just literally paid a guy on Fiverr to do an explainer video. If you have a side business, a side hustle, let's connect maybe.
Oh, yeah, yes, definitely.
Okay.
I
don't want to take away from your employer or whatever, but side hustles, let me know. I'd love to, say if we work together there. So great.
Yeah, Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and actually, I might pull it up in the break and just show everyone, like get some feedback on it. Just curious. It's the first one I did, so sort of cool. I sort of like them. I didn't realize how sort of nice they can be if they're done right. So
Oh, definitely.
yeah, great. Okay, well, much appreciated. All right, thanks, Maurice.
Yep.
And let's see who else we have. Roy, how are you?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Roy. How are you?
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm on the other side of the, I'm on the West Coast, the SoCal, sunny Southern
Okay.
California.
Wonderful.
I'm actually a system admin for a solution provider locally here. Got me interested. I actually started in the cloud infrastructure in about last year, started in the AWS ecosystem. So I'm here just to kind of like, because I got an invite from Google about a week ago to get started and whatnot, and it just appeared that I did Google you, and there's really not much of right now. Google Cloud is not as, I just wanted to get the comparison in terms of what offering services they do between the two.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So I'll cover, some of that we'll go through for sure. And then there's other courses that are, that you can also view, like, comparing GCP to AWS or Azure, for example. Those are also available. But yeah, so I'll touch on as much as I can in the time we have. Great. All right. Thank you. And you were in California, was it? You said West Coast?
Yeah, LA area.
LA. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I lived in San Diego and San Jose for years, so familiar. I got out of there. They're just too crazy expensive for me. So,
Yeah, tell me about it.
yeah, but yeah, I was working out there during the .com days. That was sort of fun out there. But yeah, that was good.
Yeah, it's
good
actually
times.
interesting because I started my AWS like early last year, and Tech Data was one of our distributors, so
Yeah.
they actually reached out to me. Actually, one of the Tech Data back is actually in Clearwater, Florida.
I'm sorry.
They're in Florida, Tech Data.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've heard of them. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Great. All right. Thanks. And I think Sachin, is that correct? Is that how you say your name? Sachin or Sachin, or forgive my pronunciation there. Sachin, can you hear us? Okay. Maybe stepped away. All right. Well, thanks for joining. Glad to see that some of the meetups are actually picking up nicely. Yesterday, we had a 3-hour sort of walkthrough yesterday in person, actually. So really excited to start the in-person events. In Jacksonville, we're going to be planning a probably in July, more of an IT day or IT weekend, where we come in and basically talk about security, cloud, and blockchain. And one area that I've been getting into is drones as well, sort of fun area as well. So a lot of fun stuff planned, at least hopefully in Jacksonville. And I know we're planning on an Orlando event in possibly May. We just have to find booking and all that as far as, so we'll be talking about cloud engineering mainly. But with that said, thanks for joining. Let's just double check. No one joined. Okay, so everybody has joined. Looks like, let me just double check. No one is waiting. Okay, so we look good. All right. So I'm going to be recording this, and you're welcome to view the recording after we made available. Definitely make sure you get the GitHub repository as well. It's right here. You can download the content. There's links. There's also some labs as well that are available. And then just, so you're aware of this, for those that are learning Google Cloud, I also posted, because I was teaching a lot for O'Reilly, and you're welcome to download any of the courses that are in the repositories. They're here for the taking, basically. Like if you, in the Google Cloud, the security engineer crash course, DevOps course, I've got some other ones here, blockchain, IBM blockchain, and there's a lot there. So I think I also taught the network engineer course is on there somewhere. So with that said, that's all available for the taking. All right, so as far as the presentation is going to go, let me make sure I'm sharing the right screen here. Okay. And again, you should have the presentation to download. And make sure I pick the right monitor here. And it looks like screen one. I've got multiple monitors, so hard to keep up. Okay. All right, so you should be able to see that now. All right, now this is the same course I would teach on O'Reilly, for example. It would be about, I think this was about 3 hours, but the content was actually meant for 8 hours. We were teaching this last year when they first released the Digital Leader. That was an 8-hour course. So you have the 8 hours of content. You'll have the practice questions. There's also test tips in there. Then I'm going to go through some demos as well. And I'm going to show you the main resources that you'll want to really consider when you're preparing for the exam. Now, this exam is, okay. So as far as this exam, if you're going to take the exam, it's very comparable to the AWS Cloud Practitioner exam. So because of that, it's entry level, but I don't want to, has anyone taken the Cloud Practitioner exam? Just curious. So if you have, then you'll be aware that it's sort of high level. It isn't super technical. It's more business focused. But the GCP exam is actually somewhat more technical than that. And it is still considered like GCP's entry level cert. So I wouldn't say this is certainly much harder than the AWS Cloud Practitioner, but it is harder. No question about it. And also too, if you're new to Google, Google has what's called Google Speak. So Google Speak is sort of like the way Google talks, in their documentation. It can be very confusing to people, and I'll go through and sort of explain some of that. But overall, it's a very fun exam to take. It's not particularly difficult, but it is more difficult than the Cloud Practitioner. So I just wanted to make sure we got that. Okay. So let's go through a quick intro. Like I said, we'll go through, take probably a couple breaks. And then, during the 4 or 5 hours that we take on this. And then we'll go through some demos. I get some whiteboards. And then if there's questions, just feel free to speak up. All right, so thanks for introducing yourselves. And quick introduction, based in Jacksonville, Florida, CLO of TECHCOMMANDERS. I've been certified in GCP, AWS. I also, before I did cloud, I was into mainly data storage and basically enterprise storage area networking. So I worked quite a bit with Brocade and EMC and all those large vendors at the time. I'm also a published author on O'Reilly, which is Pearson. Well, they changed names, so it's actually O'Reilly now. And Udemy, LinkedIn Learning. Also a published book author as well. I've got several books out there. And I'm also a subject matter expert with CompTIA. I wrote, well, I didn't write myself totally, but I participated in the Cloud Plus and the Cloud Essentials writing of those exams. And also the US Navy veteran as well. All right, so the goal of the course is to go through the main objectives of the exam. Now, if you have any questions, just feel free to pipe in the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on everything. As far as you know, the course itself, it's going to cover general cloud knowledge, general Google Cloud knowledge, and then the deep dive into the services. And that's really the main focus of the exam itself. Now, it is important to realize again that, you know, there's a lot of content. So if I go a little too fast, just say, can you repeat or whatever. So I'm going to try to get through everything the best I can. So the goal is to make sure that y'all are familiar with cloud computing fundamentals and why enterprises use GCP. And this is another, you know, question I would get is, you know, why would a company choose GCP over AWS or Azure, for example? And there's any number of reasons for that. It could be everything from like, you know, the cost structure. A lot of reasons might come down to, you know, honestly, I'll be honest, sometimes it just comes down to the sales team and how they're able to convince the leadership that this is the right cloud for them. But it also can come down to services like GCP, for example, has much better services around DevOps in a lot of cases, also machine learning and AI. So it just depends on, you know, what you're looking for. On the other hand, it's harder to find people that know Google Cloud, whereas with AWS, there's, you know, they're like a dime a dozen. And I'm not saying that there's too many, but they're just so much easier to find. And, you know, Azure sort of in the middle, like Jacksonville, Florida, for example, is an Azure town. I mean, it's, you know, it's Azure or Azure. And that's pretty much, you know, they've got a good sales team here and it just how it works. On the other hand, there is a little bit of AWS and, you know, Google, you'll find Google in Orlando like or Atlanta, but I don't know if Google even knows where Jacksonville is, to be honest. So, but there's definitely interest in Google Cloud. I don't really run into a lot of Google Cloud requirements in town, but they're occasionally here, but mainly again, it's, you know, the point is depends on where you're at, right? So in San Jose, you'll probably find good demand, and, you know, Atlanta, maybe Orlando, but, you know, maybe Columbia, maybe not, I don't know, just some things to think about. So why do enterprises choose GCP? It could be for any number of reasons, and we'll talk about that. Now, what are the services with Google Cloud that you'll want to know for the exam? So I'll cover the major services that you'll be tested on with the exam. Now, excuse me. Now, as far as billing and pricing, so this is where, again, it can come down to just the fact that Google is actually somewhat more transparent with billing than AWS is. Or Azure for that matter. And when we go through some of the demos, I'll walk you through how that is and why that is. As far as the right services, so we'll talk about everything from DevOps to compute to networking. For example, we'll go through the objectives of the certification, and then I'll provide you pretty much everything you need to know to pass the exam. So let's see, any questions? No? Okay. So you're probably here because you want to learn about the certification, you want to get Google Cloud certified, you probably want a condensed version of the course, and hopefully that answers some of that question, you know, that area. Okay, so we'll go through some of the demos, whiteboard discussions, I'll provide you documentation links, practice questions, and then I'll provide you some community sites as well. So the course itself, again, I customized basically for different training companies. Again, the goal is to try to round this out about 4 hours so that you have a really good idea. And then honestly, the other 4 hours of time you would need would be where you want to go through sort of like the exercises and practice and make sure you understand sort of like what a project is or how IAM works. Now, the exam itself is not going to test you on how to deploy compute or anything. It's more just whatever I call sort of an understanding of, why compute is the way it is. Okay, as far as the pre-requirements, hopefully if you want to take the course, you're going to have a good internet connection. If you want to go through the demos and labs that are available, there's a free tier that you can use. If you just go to Google Cloud free tier, there's information on how you sign up for that. I won't spend time on it today, but there's plenty of links and YouTube videos that can walk you through it. You do need like a credit card, of course. I don't know if they take debit cards, but I know you need a credit card at least to sign up. They don't charge you unless if you go over the free tier resources. You want to practice a course and then, of course, review everything. All right, now the link again for the GitHub I showed you earlier, the link is also in the chat. All right, let's talk about the certification. So let me go, it's probably easier to go over to the website. And also too, they do update their website pretty routinely. And we got to pull up the browser. Okay, so let me share my screen. Okay, screen 2. Okay, so you should be able to see that. Okay, looks like it can. Great. Okay, so this is the link for the certification exam itself. This is going to tell you everything you want to know about what you'll be tested on. Basically, the exam itself is going to assess you in different areas around Google Cloud, digital transformation, infrastructure, security, and operations as well. The exam fee is $99, and it takes about 90 minutes. Honestly, you probably will get through it in about an hour if you study well. And you could take this online, or you could take this basically in person, depending on where you're at. I know a lot of countries are still locked down, or a lot of organizations are still locked down for that matter as well. So you'll have to figure out what you can accomplish, I guess, in your area. So what you want to do to find out what you'll be tested on, like what are the objectives, it basically is under here, the exam guide. So a digital leader is going to be able to articulate basically the Google Cloud products and services, and basically try to show the organization that this is going to work, right? That's really the goal of a digital leader. Now, this is the exam guide here, and you'll see it's broken down into different services. And let me just, sorry about that. What's that? Okay. So over here is the exam guide. Just again, for time purposes, I won't go through everything, but basically like section 1 is about digital transformation. So that's about 10% of the exam. Now, one thing that Google Cloud started doing is they started like telling you what the percentage is of each section. And basically, that's sort of the percentage for this section. And then this section is 30%. And that's, basically working with data with Google Cloud and analytics and machine learning. And then section 3 is focused on infrastructure. That's 30%. And then over here is security and operations. And again, as far as like, for example, a couple of these, learn what modernizing IT infrastructure with Google Cloud means. So basically that just comes down to, are you able to describe why you want to use Google Cloud, why you might want to use a hybrid solution? Are you able to differentiate between VMs? So that's really the goal. And then section 4 is around security and operations. So that's the exam guide. So hopefully that's straightforward. Okay, so let's get into content again. And for those that haven't logged into Google Cloud or haven't used it, I'll walk you through a demo as well and just show you how you would get started and sign up as well if you didn't as well. So for example, just a quick note, since I already have a free tier, but I have a paid account, really, I pay for mine. So, because I exceed free tier pretty much routinely. So just go over here to Google Cloud and then put in free tier. And, let me shut that off. And then over here, Google is going to give you a certain amount of services. So you get like 20 free products and then $300 in free credits. So just to explain what the difference is. So basically the free products are going to be free, within a certain amount of usage, always. So every month you'll get 750 hours of a virtual machine use. Whereas the $300 in free credits, that's meant for any other services that are covered under the free tier products. And that does expire, though, in a certain amount of time. I want to say they've changed it, like 30 days or 60 days. So let me see what it says. It's 90 days. So when you signed up, you'll get a $300 credit in your account. And that's only good for 90 days. So just be aware of that. But the free services like over here, like Compute Engine, Cloud Storage, BigQuery, that's going to be free. You get up to 28 instances with App Engine. So if you're a developer, that's sort of cool because you would use that quite a bit, actually. And operations, AI services as well. So there's a list of services available. So, okay. Let me over here and move to the next screen. Any questions so far? Great. Okay. Nothing. All right. Great. So let's go ahead and share my screen again. All right, so again, the exam is going to really focus on, do you understand basic cloud, Google Cloud knowledge, and services and products? So that's the goal of the exam overall. Again, what is a digital leader? We sort of touched on that. All right, so basically the domains were sort of changed, but they're similar, but they've updated them a little bit. So just be aware of that. The content's the same, just Google Cloud does this pretty routinely to where they like to change the domain titles and percentages a little bit, but the content's the same. It's just they just like to change it every 6 months for the fun of it. Now, as far as the exam prep, there's a lot here, so just be aware of that. All right, so let's talk about cloud computing and what that is, why that's important. Now, from a cloud perspective, it sounded like some of you were already familiar with cloud. We're going to take probably about 40 minutes to go through this at the most, maybe 30 minutes. And then we'll move on to the main services and, what is the major percentage of the exam. Now, for those that are new to the cloud, we'll make sure you understand this as well. All right, so, and I also do have review questions and then also a summary we'll go through as well. All right, now, when it comes to the domain objectives, again, it's focused on, do you understand basic cloud? So it's sort of like the cloud practitioner exam. I just want to know, can you differentiate between like infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or software as a service? And do you understand the characteristics of cloud? So that's the goal. Now, also too, what is cloud computing, right? So the official model of cloud computing is here. This is from NIST, which is under the Department of Commerce in the United States, based out of, I think, somewhere in Maryland. I forgot the town, like, I don't know, Bethesda, somewhere near Bethesda. And basically, they're under the Department of Commerce. And NIST, which is the National, I think, I always forget the acronym, Institute of Science and Technology or something like that. I don't think that's exactly right. We'll have to look it up, but you get the point. So they're an organization, but the goal of NIST is really to test out technologies for the government, but also they propagate that information to the public as well. And that's sort of why it's under the Department of Commerce. So one of the things that NIST does is they do everything around providing standards for the government. For example, FedRAMP is one of those areas that was worked on as well from NIST. And the goal is to just provide standardization, best practices, also to guidelines for the government, so that we don't have, like if you ever worked in the government as a military person or a contractor or employee, you'll know that if you go to like the Department of State or the Department of Defense or the FBI or Secret Service, they all sort of try to do things their own way. And that caused a lot of what was like overhead for the government. So that's where NIST sort of comes in basically. So they put together this definition for a reason, because even at the time when cloud came out, there wasn't any real standards. It was sort of like AWS and Azure and Rackspace, they would just, NTT was big at the time. They would just do their own thing. And, you didn't really know what platform was or what infrastructure really meant. So that's sort of the goal. So there's a publication, if this is of interest for you to read. All right, so let's just sum up what cloud is. So it really is the on-demand delivery of compute resources, database storage, applications, and other resources through a cloud services platform, which is over the internet where you pay as you go. So basically, it comes down to the 5 characteristics of that. Now, we'll talk more about the characteristics in the next lesson, I believe. But just be aware that cloud is really an on-demand delivery mechanism that is provided by a third party so that you could use resources that are effectively rented to you or leased to you is another way to look at it. Now, another thing too is to know the difference or what virtualization is. There's a lot of confusion sometimes where people think virtualization and cloud are the same thing. They're really very different. For example, if we didn't have virtualization, provisioning cloud resources would be pretty hard to do. It would be manual. It would actually be what we had before, which was called like managed services effectively, if you ever heard that term. So without virtualization, the cloud was very difficult to manage. Now, from a historical perspective, we basically had virtualization for, well over 50 plus years in mainframes. Now, over time, what really made virtualization take off for the PC market was really basically in 1999 when VMware came out with their x86 solution. And then historically, over time, we sort of grew, you know, from that point. I'll let you review that list if you want. All right. Now, it's important to understand what is the stack, basically. And basically, this is what came from NIST. This is what they really put together. And this is still the de facto standard where all the cloud platform providers follow as well. So whether you're using with AWS or you're with Google, this is really all similar. Basically, essential characteristics. This is basically saying that we need to be able to define a cloud. And how do we define a cloud? Well, the cloud should provide us network access. In other words, we're going to be able to access that cloud from any resource, from any platform, from anywhere. So if you're on, you know, a phone, or you're on a mobile device, or you're on a computer, you should be able to access that resource. Now, elasticity is different in the sense that I want to be able to scale up and scale down as needed. So if I want 1 VM or 100, then that should be provided, you know, reasonably on demand to the user. Measured service. So this is where I'm only going to pay for what I use. Just like a utility bill, right? You know, we all use electricity, but we don't generate electricity ourselves generally, at least, you know, unless you're living, you know, off grid somewhere. But generally everybody uses a utility, and that's what the cloud really is. It's more of a utility that we're using. And then on-demand self-service, meaning that when I want to deploy that VM, I just log in and I deploy that VM. Resource pooling. So this is just saying that I'm sharing resources with other basically customers. And this is where the cloud really gets its benefit. Because of virtualization, we're able to pool resources, segment resources, so that the provider can make money. Now, the service models basically is just a way to state what is the type of cloud service that is being delivered. Is it a software solution where, similar to, like, for example, if you're familiar with Salesforce, Office 365, Google Workspace, those are all SaaS solutions. Platform as a service, this is really used for developers. Generally, this is where you'll see development teams load basically their runtime environments and then basically test out, deploy, validate, whatever they want to do, their applications. And then infrastructure as a service. Now, this is where, you know, most cloud professionals will likely spend most of their time managing basically compute services, network services, DevOps services, data services. Lastly, we have the deployment models. It's important to realize that these deployment models are also pretty straightforward, but just realize that, you know, public is what? It's open to the public. Private is what? That's where you're going to deploy the service, you know, basically on your own resources in the house. You control the resource. Hybrid, that's basically saying I'm going to use 2 or more deployment models. Generally, a lot of organizations now, they use a combination of public cloud and then private cloud. Lastly, we have what's called community cloud. So the community cloud is similar to where you have a group of like-minded organizations, such as, you know, for the example of the government or education or healthcare providers, an HMO, let's say, where they're sharing resources that are cloud services, and basically they're sharing them and generally have more or less, you know, what is a like-minded approach to work together. Now, why do companies use cloud computing? Well, there's any number of reasons, right? We're going to have everything from basically leveraging resources of the provider. and being able to use that resource without having to put up front typically what we would have to do in, on-prem before the cloud, where we'd have to provision resources on-prem, and then we might have to get CapEx funds. So the cloud provides that capability to where we don't have to have any investment really to get started. It allows us to use enterprise services without, again, having that big budget. What's nice about the cloud is that it levels the playing field, basically. What I mean is when you level the playing field, what that does is that a company, for example, let's say like Goldman Sachs or Bank of America, let's say, they're going to have more resources than that mom and pop shop two streets down, let's say. But both, all of those companies, whether it's a Fortune 100 company or, a local business, they can use the cloud services on equal footing. And again, that's the beauty of the cloud. And that's what's really enabled the startup revolution in a lot of ways, is because of the fact companies like Uber, for the longest time, and they were a client of mine when I worked for Dimension Data, they didn't have any on-prem resources really. They were all cloud. So, companies like Uber or Airbnb, they would never have gotten started, the way they got started if it wasn't for the cloud. 20 years before that, they'd be a pipe dream probably. So, but again, just sort of saying, right? So just be aware that the cloud really just levels the playing field. Okay, so some test tips here. When we go into the exam, what I've done is I put together for each, not every lesson, but most of the lessons, the main points that you want to sort of remember when you go in to take the exam. So cloud computing is on-demand delivery, just remember that. Virtualization and cloud are complementary, they're not the same. And then remember too, that in cloud computing, we pay for the resources used. Okay, so the essential cloud characteristics are listed here. I won't go through like every one for time purposes, but they're there to review. But basically, again, we briefly talked about them. So remember the 5 characteristics, that and the definitions are listed here. I think the main point with this, again, you're going to probably on the exam get maybe 4 to 5 basic cloud questions. So it's important that you can differentiate between the 5 characteristics. And I'll go through some sample questions on what you can expect. And again, here's a table just put together to sort of sum it up. And then the test tip. So when I go through the rest of the course, I'm not going to read the test tips. They're just there for you to study, basically. But I want to make sure you're aware of that, because again, trying to memorize a lot of the content can be hard. So think of this as like sort of like a little cheat sheet I put together. All right, and then the service model. So we have software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service. Again, try to remember the difference between these. Remember too, infrastructure is where we're providing resources such as data services, storage, for example, compute. That's going to be our infrastructure services. Platform as a service is really meant for developers, programmers to basically deploy a runtime environment. Now, a runtime environment, just to clarify what that means if you're not familiar with it, is just basically saying a configuration for the developer. Usually it's in a language, it could be Python, it could be JavaScript, etc. So it could be any number. So that's really what that means when I say runtime. Okay, and then infrastructure as a service. So for example, when we deploy Compute Engine, that's going to be, or AWS EC2, that's going to be infrastructure as a service. Platform as a service, for example, would be App Engine in Google Cloud. And then if it's AWS, for example, that would be Elastic Beanstalk. And then software as a service would be on Google G Suite. Actually now, again, I'll update this, but it's actually now Workspace now. Google has recently changed the name. It is now called Google Workspace. And then Office 365. One thing I like about Microsoft is they don't seem to change their names. Google and AWS, they're pretty hard to keep up sometimes. They just change the name and don't even announce it. It's sort of hilarious. Actually, AWS is sort of funny because every year, like at the AWS reInvent, you know that 20% of the services would be changed and somehow some naming or definition. And you can always expect that. With Google, it's just, you wake up on a Friday and they just changed it, no announcement to partners. You just have to figure it out. So anyways, all right, so let's see what we have here. Okay, service models. All right, this is actually sort of a common comparison for those that haven't seen it. This was done by Paul Kerrison. He seemed to be the inventor of this pizza as a service. Now, if you're new to the cloud, this should be really helpful. If you've been working the cloud for a while, you probably have seen this. But the goal is to just, again, compare basically cloud computing to pizza. Of course, everybody can relate to pizza generally. So for example, if you make your own pizza, that's like, managing your own services on-prem. If you are going to do a take and bake, like if you go to the grocery store or Papa Murphy's, if you're familiar with that chain, that's where you go and you pick up the pizza. It's put together for you. You just have to cook it and cut it up and clean up after yourself. And then platform as a service is comparable to you calling up Domino's or Pizza Hut or whatever that may be. And then dining out is basically software as a service, sort of like Salesforce or Office 365, right? You don't have to worry about the coding and the back end, the virtual machines or anything like that. And again, sum that up. All right, now the deployment models. Now again, NIST defined these as well. They're pretty well defined. Again, make sure you understand the difference between public, private, community, and hybrid. And that's there for you as well to review. Okay, now let's talk about another term, multi-tenancy. Now again, this is our basic cloud 101. We just want to make sure that we don't get confused between some of the terminology we may run into on the exam. So for example, actually just a quick story, I took the beta exam of this last year and it was 100 questions and I think about 15 questions I put in comments on because they were pretty rough questions as far as how they were written. And that's the Google speak I was talking about. They have their own version of basically test development at Google. It's not like AWS, it's not like Azure, it's not like CompTIA. They do their own thing. It's like college kids stuck in a room on the weekend, just having a party. It's just a different world. And again, if you haven't taken a Google exam, you're going to see this because I get a lot of comments routinely from folks that took their first Google exam. They're like, I don't understand. They have these weird questions and they're like paragraphs. And that's the other thing too that catches people. So like, for example, like a term like this, multi-tenancy, you might see in the exam stated. Now, most of us probably know what it is, but in case you don't, this is where we're sharing resources between basically a provider with other, consumers, basically. So because it's a public cloud, it's a multi-tenancy solution we're using. But on the exam, you might get, like an exam screen might be this big, but the question might be this big. And you have to read like all of this, and that confuses people. Whereas if you take the AWS comparable exam or the Azure exam, it's like 2 sentences and it's a simple answer. So this is what confuses people sometimes. So I want to make sure you get the terms before you run into it. All right, a couple other things. Some other terms you want to look at. Again, these are well-defined in the content, so take a look at it. Okay, resiliency and dependability. So we're just about done with this section, and then we'll move on to, you know, the part that you probably want to really learn, which is the services and all that. Now, resiliency and dependability. It's important to know the difference, and it's also important as well to understand how Google defines it. So basically, when we look at redundancy, this is like the duplication of components so that a system doesn't fail, right? Resiliency is different, where if there's a fault, it's able to maintain what's called persistence, for example. So for example, we may have, for example, 2 disk drives, right? Okay, that's great to have 2 disk drives in our computer, but if we don't have a RAID solution set up or mirroring, then that, you know, we have redundancy, but we don't have resiliency. And that's important. Another example, like in the cloud, is we may have deployed services like cloud storage, for example. And if we don't deploy that, like, for example, we may copy from one region to another or from one zone to another zone. That's great. We have a copy to another zone. But if we lose a zone, for example, which happens routinely in Northern Virginia with AWS, in case you haven't learned that yet. And if you don't like set up according to AWS best practices, for example, or Google's, then you shouldn't expect to have your service available. It's just sort of basics, right? So you have to set everything up to be resilient, right? That's the point. Like on the exam, again, you're going to be reading the question and it might be talking about redundancy, availability, dependability, resilience. These are terms that can be confusing. And you just want to make sure that you can differentiate between these before you take the exam. Okay. Characteristics of resiliency. Again, I'll leave that there for your own reading pleasure. But basically, again, resilient computing is basically managing failover and distributing redundancy appropriately. Now, how does Google provide resiliency? So that's something that, again, we need to pay attention to here. Everything from regions and zones to redundant hardware to load balancing to HA services. So for example, cloud DNS is really one of the few cloud services out there that is guaranteed 100% uptime. GLB, Global Load Balancer. Instance groups, auto scaling, health check. So we'll talk about pretty much most of these by the time we're done today. Okay, replication. I think we know what replication is. I'm gonna probably move on with this unless there's a question. Just monitoring the chat, I don't see anything, so okay. All right, let's talk about replication from a Google Cloud perspective, okay. Now, one of the things to pay attention to here is that Google replicates between zones. So for example, the way they actually handle a lot of their services is that it's automatically replicated, for example, in the back end from Google. So because of that, we need to pay attention to regions, zones. We could also replicate cloud to cloud and cloud to data center as well. But basically, like if we're in the same region, and this is similar to other providers where, you know, if one zone goes down in the region, now I probably should clarify regions and zones. We're going to cover that in more detail in a few minutes. But so if you're new to the cloud, a region is basically a collection of zones. Now, a zone is basically a virtual data center with most providers. And what that means is, for example, if you go to Northern Virginia or Charleston, South Carolina, where Google is, you'll see that Google has a big campus, for example, a large data center, and basically it's all in the same area or the same building in a lot of cases, where it's just provisioned to a point where each zone has its own power, its own networking, its own redundant components. So that's how the providers typically will provide redundancy and availability between regions and zones. So think of a region as a collection of mini data centers. Okay, and then two other terms you probably are familiar with, and again, this can be confusing to folks that are new to IT. Automation versus orchestration. Automation is when we take a manual task and we automate that task by basically creating a function that is going to work without intervention. For example, writing a script, that's automating a task, for example. Running a cron job would be like automating a task, right? And again, if you've been into, IT for a while, this is nothing new to you. Orchestration is different. This is where we're going to take a bunch of tasks and basically orchestrate them together. So for example, 2 or more tasks typically would be an orchestration. Now in Google Cloud, the service that we want to use is typically Cloud Deployment Manager. This is where we're going to put in a YAML file, basically a list of like virtual machines we want to deploy or cloud storage buckets we want to dump data into. That's how we orchestrate in Google Cloud. Now, I also use third-party services, for example, like Terraform. If we want, sure, we could do that. So effectively, again, what's the difference? Automation is referring to a single task. Orchestration is going to be basically multiple tasks to create a workflow. Okay, chargeback. So chargeback is a term that's widely used in the cloud world to basically account for cloud usage between like business units. And that is just a way that we're able to maintain some kind of sanity. One of the things that when it was early on, it looks like we have a question or chat. Let me see here. I don't believe, I'm not sure a voucher. I don't think we promised a voucher to anyone. I'm not sure where that came from. Usually the training would cost you money as well. We're giving it for free. So appreciate the comment. No, I don't know about a voucher code or anything. Unfortunately though, Google doesn't typically give away test vouchers. They will give out a voucher to like students though, like if you go to a college and if you have an EDU, you could sign up for their education training that they have. And I'll show that to anyone that might be interested, just let me know. But it's called Google Education, unless they change the name as well this year, which it's probably about time that they change the name of that too. So, but anyways, I'll show you where you can find that out. So good question, no, but no, there's no vouchers or anything. The cost of the exam is $99. So great question. Okay, and then some characteristics to chargeback. Again, the goal is to take a cloud bill from a company and be able to level it out and zero it out basically at the end of the day is really the goal. For example, I was working, this is about 3 or 4 years ago, before FinOps sort of came into play. There's a college down actually in Lakeland, I think it was, actually, now that I think about it. It was in Lakeland, it's near Orlando. Polk County is, no, that Polk County, is that Lakeland? Polk County. It's home of that really cool sheriff. Anyways, I was working with Polk County Community College or Polk Community College, something like that, and I think it was Polk. I have to look it up. I forgot. I think it was Polk County. Remember, it was near Lakeland, off at 4. But anyways, the community college down there. One of the things that they were doing is they were teaching, of course, IT courses, and they had a really hard time to sort of, manage their VMware cloud instances basically at the time. And anyways, so that was another story. So chargeback is something that can come into play. And then, for example, too, a lot of companies run into some challenges too with how do you break up charges? And the way you want to do that in the cloud is to use basically approaches like tagging, for example, metadata. And we'll touch on that. I think we'll touch on that at the end, but we may not. Not so much that you need to know that really for the exam, but it's important to know that chargeback is basically a way to mitigate overspending, but also provide accountability, right? So for example, it's very common that development teams, need to be aware of the fact that, their services are being metered. Developers are notorious for wanting to build, and I don't blame them because I've been there, right? So just, one thing that comes up as a developer, for example, is you'll want to deploy the biggest and baddest virtual machine you can, right? Well, the problem is that's different on-prem versus in the cloud. In the cloud, you're paying for that. And that's a very expensive way to deploy an application if you're not even using half of the resources, for example. So that's, reason that we need to have chargeback. Vendor lock-in, let me see a chat here. Okay, thanks. I knew it was Polk County, and it was a county where you had sheriff, that cool sheriff that, everybody seems to like. Sheriff Grady, I think it is. I think that was his name. I had actually ran into him when I was at a sales meeting, and we went out to lunch. He was at, I think it was like a Cracker Barrel, some Bob Evans, something like that. So yeah, he's like a celebrity down there. Okay, so yeah, thanks for clarifying that. So as far as vendor lock-in, right? One of the last things that any company wants to have is to be forced to stay in a solution. Now, some vendors out there are notorious for this, right? Like Oracle. I know 20 years ago when I was working with Oracle, they were just so difficult to deal with, right? And, I don't know, I haven't worked a lot with them lately, so I can't say, but I do know that they're pretty challenging to deal with on-prem deployments going to the cloud. Where we go to the cloud, it'll actually cost you more money to deploy Oracle in the cloud. So these are some things that companies have to sort of think about. And that's where, having like open APIs comes into play. And that's really some things to think about. So vendor lock-in is just basically trying to restrict the customer from moving, basically. And we want to avoid that. And that's accomplished through typically open APIs. Okay, cloud standards. Now, cloud standards are basically developed by different bodies out there. When I say different, like, for example, Cloud Standards Institute, CSA for security, cloud security, any number of, even NIST, for example. And so having standards to follow is really important. Now, some of the organizations are listed here, like NIST, Cloud Security Alliance, DMTF. Okay, CapEx and OpEx. Now, it's important to realize that companies traditionally, before we went to the cloud, would normally go through a procurement exercise. So for example, when I was working at, let's say it was, what was it, Maximus or SAIC or HP, one of the things I would run into, and this, was trying to get additional gear. So we needed like additional blade servers, additional storage. And to do that, we couldn't just go and use the company credit card to go buy an $80,000, storage, array, just a JBOD for that matter. And because of that, we had to go through what was called a procurement exercise. So that's like a CapEx exercise. That's where you could take like, weeks to get quotes. more weeks to get approval and then wait for funding, and it could be months. And, you know, the CapEx limits could have been anywhere from $5,000 up to $50,000, depending on the company. So, so basically when I say limits, what I was saying is if it's under like $5,000, it wasn't considered CapEx and you could use OpEx funds. But again, every organization was different, right? Now, cloud has shifted basically the spending from CapEx to OpEx. And that's really the main point here that we want to know for the exam. Oops, another test tip. And then there's going to be a little bit of math on the exam, maybe a question you might get around ROI and TCO. Basically, know the difference between ROI and TCO. Return on investment is basically going to be a way that we measure basically the return. In other words, a profit basically, or loss as well, it could be from a project, for example. And then TCO is the total cost when we add everything up. So we want to understand basically what an ROI calculation is, how long that return on investment might be calculated. And again, it's just understanding what the benefits of the measurement could be. So for example, if we're able to deploy something with a better ROI, we might be able to reduce licensing costs. We might be able to have better agility or reduce operational expenses. We could have a shared service, and instead of having every department have their own Salesforce account, let's say, we could, you know, have them have one master Salesforce account where everybody, you know, works together and we get the discount. Same thing like with Google Workspace, or even using infrastructure as a service for that matter. One thing that Google does really well is that they have multiple tiers of discounts. So for example, even if you have different business units deploying resources in the same region, then Google will figure that out and give your organization a discount on top of that. So that's another benefit. So what's the difference between ROI and all that? But basically, ROI is used to measure the success of a potential project. The goal is to obtain a solid ROI and a low TCO. All right, and after, I think we got one or two more lessons after this before review, and then we'll take a short break. As far as cloud computing is concerned, why do companies go to the cloud? Well, it could be faster time to market, scalability, flexibility, business models, reduced IT staffing. It is important too, like for example, like this type of content, you're going to want to translate that when you read and I have some sample questions coming up. I'll go through. You want to read some of these to where, you know, what is the reason that the company would really want to go to the cloud? So it's about really understanding the use case of some of these questions that they're asking to sort of select, like, what is the enabler, or why should the company use infrastructure as a service versus platform? Some other reasons could be tax benefits, reduced infrastructure spending. All right, section summary. So we learned that NIST has a cloud model composed of 5 characteristics, 3 service models, and 4 deployment models. We know that cloud computing has significant business enablers. We also learned that cloud can provide low-cost services, agility, elasticity, so on and so on. There is 5 essential characteristics, and you'll want to know what they are. So make sure you memorize those characteristics. What is chargeback? GCP is a public cloud. Hybrid cloud is when we combine on-prem services with GCP. There's 3 cloud service models, again, remember those. And there's 4 deployment models. And the way we prevent vendor lock-in is through using what's called open standards. Okay, first review question. Let's see how we do here. Which of the following 5 essential characteristics would be used for enabling the sharing of resources between cloud tenants? Anybody want to guess? Put in the chat. Okay, so that would be resource pooling. And then as far as review questions, number 2, which of the following would be considered benefits of using cloud service such as GCP? And those benefits would be low-cost services, open and flexible service, and then secure services. Now, Google does not support Open API, nor does AWS or Azure. They don't support open APIs for every service, nor are every service considered fully managed as well. Which characteristic would provide the ability to ensure proper billing is done for your cloud service? Well, that would be what? Measured service, right? All right, you are currently considering an application that will be hosted on Google Cloud. You want to ensure that if there's an issue with the application, that it will be tolerant of any outages. What would describe this requirement? Remember, there's some words that we have to be able to distinguish between, and that would be resiliency in this case. All right, let's take a short break. I've got 10:15. Come back at 10, let's say 10:20, and we'll continue on. Any questions? Okay. Great. All right, so I'll see everybody back in 5 minutes. Okay, welcome back. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, so this section here, we're going to get into the basics of Google Cloud. We want to know the services at a high level, and then we want to just understand some of the use cases and all that fun stuff. So there's a lot to cover here. I'll go through a good amount of the demos. Again, for time purposes, we won't be able to cover everything, but I'll give you a good start. And then also too, I'm going to be giving everybody access to the Google Cloud courses on TECHCOMMANDERS. So I'll show you how you could sign up for that as well. And that way you go through the full course if you want to see all the demos and stuff. Again, the goal of this meetup was just to provide some insight into the exam and to get people excited about Google Cloud, hopefully. Okay, now, as far as this section here, this is sort of like our introductory into Google Cloud part of the course. We'll want to know, for example, like how Google Cloud is structured. I'll talk about, some comparisons between other providers in Google. We'll need to know regions and zones, the hierarchy. So Google uses what's called an organization, projects, folders, all that. We'll talk about pricing. We'll talk about billing. I'll talk about support and SLAs. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get into compliance and the resources, the costs. We'll talk about the segmentation and support as well. All right, so let's get into the first demo, and I wanted to do my Google Cloud 101 sort of demo here. And let me position myself. Where is my other screen? My console is screen 2. Okay. All right. So what we want to do here is I just want to get people familiar with the console and how it's different from like AWS, for example, and Azure. For example, when we first log in, you could see that we have sort of a dashboard here. What I could do is go over here and I could customize, for example, my dashboard. I could turn this on, for example, turn on these, or I could turn these off and, choose to view whatever I want to view. And then I just go done, and now it'll show all of this, from that perspective. So what I want to do now is I want to go over to, it's weird, I had it deployed yesterday. Let me see. I know I shut one down. Maybe I shut them both down. Okay, maybe I did. All right, so let's see here. What we want to do is I'm going to get a virtual machine running so that I could show you later how monitoring works and logging and all that, so you have that idea. Now, to deploy a virtual machine is relatively simple. One thing that's different from AWS is when we first log into AWS, we would have to go over here and select the region that we want to be in. Now, in Google Cloud, when you log into the dashboard, you're sort of in a global view. And basically, this is where you go over to the right to select your services and all of that. But over here, when we deploy a virtual machine or a container or whatever, we need to select basically the region. Now, there's a tool here similar to what would be called, I think, AWS Ping, if you're familiar with that. There's Cloud Ping here. This is for AWS. And this would just give you a sort of latency check for like AWS regions. Now, Google Cloud also someone, it's not an official Google tool, just like that isn't an official AWS tool, but there is a tool called GCP, and this sort of does the same thing. So if you want to sort of get an idea of the latency between your region and your desktop, or your edge location, I should say, then this should give you sort of an idea. So because I'm in Jacksonville, Florida, usually almost always South Carolina and Northern Virginia always seem to come up about the same. And you can see here, this gives me the latency as well. So this tells you how that works. And this just goes to the global load balancer, basically, with Google. And again, that's sort of comparable to that. Right, so that's called GCP for those that are interested. Now, to create a VM, we're going to need to use like the appropriate machine family and series. By default, we're going to use general purpose, EC2. And then I'm just going to leave the defaults for the purpose of this. Now, the way we set up a firewall in AWS is a little different than in Google. Whereas AWS uses like a security group, we call it a firewall, where we're going to add rules to the firewall. Now, one thing that I like about Google compared to the other providers is that they sort of tell you automatically before you deploy anything, and you don't have to go to a calculator to figure it out. They tell you what your estimate is for the month and per hour. So for example, to deploy this virtual machine instance, I would be looking at $25 a month. Now, if I want to go to a compute optimized machine, you can see that that's going to jump that to $122 a month. Now, again, that's a big difference, right? And then memory optimized, right? That's even more fun, right? Look at that, $33,000 a month. It's a lot of money, right? You're gonna have a good reason to justify that in most organizations I've ever worked in. So, so anyways, that's memory optimized. And what you can do with this is, though, it does support GPUs. I wouldn't recommend that this would even be profitable for Bitcoin or Ethereum, but you know, it's up to you to figure that out, I guess. So you could add a GPU. So GPU is basically a specialized processing unit that allows you sort of basically a large configuration of memory, processing power, compute power, etc., that is able to crunch, you know, numbers a lot quicker, right? And again, so that's that cost, right? So Google sort of tells you everything before you actually deploy the VM, so you know ahead of time. Whereas like in AWS, I got to go over the calculator and I got to put it together and, you know, hope I'm right, right? So Google sort of, you know, makes it easier in that perspective, I think. All right, so I definitely don't want to deploy a memory optimized. I'm going to go with the micro, and let's see the cost of that. So you can see that, see how that drops that down to $7 a month, right? And what is also cool is for those that like command line, that you want to use command line, just go over here to the equivalent command line. And what is that not doing that for? That should pop up the, I don't know, I'm having some weird issues here. Usually that, I don't know if I have my pop-up blocker on or something, but I don't know. So anyways, you should be able to go here and that'll pop up the command line. Usually it's not an issue. And then over here is the rest. So that'll pop up the rest. And you copy that to clipboard. And you should be able to do the same thing with the command line for some reason. Let me reload that. Stranger things have happened. There it is. Again, just browser issue maybe. So over here, you can see it'll pop up the gcloud command for you. And you copy that to a clipboard or just go over here to run in Cloud Shell. Now, Cloud Shell is a micro instance. Basically, it'll deploy this micro VM. And basically, it's a global based virtual machine. So it's not based in any region or zone. You're able to access it anywhere. And so you just copy the command in there and authorize your Cloud Shell. One thing about Google Cloud is that you're going to use your Gmail account, for example, to use the service in most cases. So that'll go ahead and deploy that VM. And now you can see that that looks like that has been deployed. And we could check that any number of ways, but let's just go over here. And you can see that that VM now has been deployed, right? So pretty cool, pretty straightforward. Okay, so I want to get the VM up and running so I could show you some of the monitoring and stuff, some kind of activity going on. All right, so I go back over here. And in a few minutes, you'll see activity kick up in this, and you could validate that. Now, Cloud SQL is another common service that you'll likely use, and an app engine as well. If time permits, I'll go through BigQuery and some other services. But again, a lot of these you don't have to memorize on how to use them. I just want to sort of just show you that, so you have an idea if you haven't seen it before. Okay, so we'll talk about projects and what is called basically the organizational structure of Google Cloud here coming up in a few minutes. So we'll get to this in a few more minutes. So we'll go back over here to our presentation. All right, that should propagate. So GCP is a service offered by Google, and it is a suite of cloud computing services that Google has put together about, I want to say about 5 years ago now. It's been a while, and basically, also too, it's important to point out too that Google was offering cloud services before that as well, but they just didn't have an official platform that they're using like AWS. So for example, like App Engine was released in 2008, whereas Amazon S3 and EC2, they were released about the same time as well. So Google's been in the cloud business. It's just that they were providing App Engine effectively free to developers to learn technology. So that's important to know. So Google's been around a while in the cloud. It's just that their strategy was just very different than AWS. Now, why use Google Cloud? So Google has just a wide variety of services. From a numbers perspective, they're not quite, one-to-one yet in a lot of areas. For example, Google probably sort of stinks in areas like mobility, what do you call that? Alexa related stuff, home or Google Home. I mean, they're just IoT is another area, but Google on the other hand is extremely strong when it comes to their data services, development platforms, machine learning. They're very strong now in security. I would not have said that probably about 2 years ago, but now they're really sort of, really a one-to-one with AWS and Azure in a lot of cases. And again, management, operations is a really great tool. I think, the thing about Cloud and it was called Stackdriver. Again, Google renamed Stackdriver to Cloud Operations this year, about a year ago. And again, who knows what they're going to change it to next year, but I fully expect they'll probably change the name. But just because that's been a pattern, it seems. As far as Google Cloud is concerned, though, I mean, they're really strong in some areas. And it's important, you know, when you go into the exam, or let's say you work for a partner, Google Cloud or AWS, or any other cloud provider, it is important that you could go in and, you know, say, okay, well, you know, AWS, you know, might be really strong in this area, but Google Cloud might be stronger in this area. And it's really important that you can understand some of that. All right. So where is Google the leader in some of the areas here? So they have a solid infrastructure. One thing that AWS and even Azure really can't say is Google's infrastructure is really enterprise grade 100%. And Google owns all of their infrastructure, which is not true of a lot of the other cloud providers, because like AWS leases a lot of their sites. For example, the other cloud providers like Azure and AWS, they don't have submarine lines. One thing that people don't realize is that Google does have their own submarine lines going across the Atlantic. And they've had that for a long time because of their search services and all that. So they've had that infrastructure in place. So when you're using Google Cloud, you're actually using the same services that are used by internal Google services, like Google Search or Google Ads or whatever. So Google does have, again, a lot of creative, I would say, I don't know if creative is the right word, but unique. Maybe creative is a good word. What I'm getting at is they've got some different approaches to billing with their virtual machines and discounts. So they have sustained use discounts. They have basically similar to like reserved instances, but they also have tiered discounts and all that. I'll talk about the billing coming up a little bit more in detail. Now, Google does have services with that share there, sorry. Okay, so Google does have services in all of the service models. So infrastructure as a service, platform, and SaaS. So SaaS, for example, would be what? Google Workspace or Cloud Identity. So Google does provide different types of service, and some of these are going to be managed services. Some of these are going to be unmanaged as well. So you have a choice. Now, here's an example of Google's locations. If you go over to the Google Cloud website, you'll see you could see an updated list, for example, in graphics of their network and also their zones and regions. Now, when we compare like AWS, Azure, and Google, they're all like literally within 1 or 2 regions of each other, basically. And because of that, you know, there's no differentiator really when it comes to regions, unless if, you know, you're looking for, you know, a specific, you know, region in a specific country, like maybe Google has one in the Netherlands, whereas Azure might not. You know, these are just some of the small differentiators that may or may not matter. I don't know. But when it comes to the numbers with zones and regions, they're all the same. Literally, Google went from 4 years ago to having half of what AWS had to basically being right there, literally. Now, Google does have, of course, their own infrastructure. They own pretty much everything they can own. They do share, well, this probably isn't a surprise to anyone in the US at least. If you ever read or actually are familiar with this gentleman who was a NSA or CIA contractor named, I think it was NSA out in Hawaii, Edward Snowden, if you're familiar with that name. But basically, like Google shares a lot of the submarine lines directly with the government agencies. No surprise there. I'm not going to speculate on, basically these major providers like Google, Verizon, they're all really just part of the government effectively. And, as a former Beltway bandit myself, who, worked at a lot of these facilities years ago, it's, not a surprise to me. So pretty much it's understood that way. So what I'm getting at is that Google really does own everything they can own, and anything they can't, they share pretty much with, the government in a lot of respects. So that is important to realize. Now, I can't say that for AWS or Azure. I think Microsoft Azure does have shared infrastructure with the government in DC that I'm aware of, but with that said, it's another story for another day. So Google, though, the differentiator here, is that Google does have a lot more submarine lines. They also own their own infrastructure from point to point between region and region as well. Whereas a lot of the other cloud providers, they lease it, for example. And here's a network map. You can see over here, the green lines and the blue lines. So you can see submarine cables, current networks that Google owns as well. So that again is a major investment. And Google's had a lot of this, for decades, literally. All right, let's talk about the cloud infrastructure with Google. And you'll see that a lot of this is similar to the other providers as well, right? So nothing new there. Again, the naming might be a little different, but it's the same concept. All right, so Google Cloud has regions. So a region is what? A collection of zones. Basically, it's a location to run resources. So, for example, Northern Virginia, that's the region. And then in Northern Virginia, we also have what's called zones. These are isolated deployment areas in a region. So again, it's important to realize that when Google deploys these regions, that these are independent geographic areas that do consist of low latency, right? Redundancy and all that. Okay, so one of the things that you'll definitely want to think about when you take the exam is, would I want to choose Iowa over Northern Virginia? Or would I want to choose Iowa over, let's say, the Netherlands, right? Or Brazil? Why would you go and choose, if your customer base is all in the United States, why would you want to choose Brazil? You probably wouldn't, right? On the other hand, if you have an employee base in Brazil based on compliance requirements, you need to have, especially Brazil is very difficult to deal with from my experience. For example, just like the EU now with the GDPR, you'll really need to look at, for example, do I need to have a region here? Do I need to have a region here to meet these compliance requirements? And a lot of these discussions you need to have as well, probably with the legal team or whoever handles compliance in the organization. So that's one factor. So compliance is a big deal. Cost. So the cost for deploying a resource in one region over another could be very significant. It could be like 40% difference. Like in the US, it's a lot cheaper than in Asia, for example. Also, too, it's important to note that not all services are available in every region. If you want a specific type of processor or GPU, you need to know what region and zone that's going to be available with. Latency. Okay, so one of the things we need to do is do latency checks. For example, from on-prem to wherever we're going to deploy services in, to validate that the latency is within, reasonable specs, right? Also, too, the customer location is important as well, not just, your location, but the customer, right? Now, here's an example. This is an older slide. Again, Google has built this up a little bit more. but you can go ahead and view that on the zone page, and I'll show you where you can find this here in a minute. But this is just an example, right? So for example, if we go over here to US East 1 and then East 4. So for example, we have Charleston, and then we have Northern Virginia, and we have like Central 1. This would be Iowa, for example. And then we have Northeast, that would be Montreal, Canada. So with that said, again, just so you can see here, this is just an example of the breakdown. So for example, if I go over here to like US West, I think it's what, California somewhere, and there's West 1, A, B, and C. And then if I go to Northern Virginia here, they actually, I think, have another one now. So again, just double check what the latest graph is. A, B, C, and F. So for example, I have four regions, 4 zones in that one region. So Google does not like to deploy a region without having at least typically 3 zones available. However, they will deploy some of them on limited services just to get them started if there's like a high demand. And then over here again is that same chart. That's an older one. Again, you can see that I think they're up to like 35 now, or 38 regions. It's somewhat different. So that's an older side. So check out this page here, and you go over that and check it out. I'll leave that up to you to look at. Okay, so just go into the exam and know the difference between regions and zones. Understand a region is this, and a zone is that, and what is the purpose of them. All right, so let's talk about the hierarchy. So Google has a hierarchy that is basically broken down into 4 levels. So we'll get 10, so make sure time is good. Okay, so as far as the organization, let me just go back. So as far as like the structure of Google Cloud, it's broken down into 4 major sort of components. We have the organization, we have folders, we have projects, and then we have resources. So an organization is like a top level domain. In other words, if we're using Google Workspace or Cloud Identity, we have an organization. That's our top level domain. That's where I take my company name, for example, or your company name, and it's like mywidgets.com, and I create basically what is a lifecycle in Workspace, and I propagate it over to Google Cloud as well, so that the users that are in Workspace, I can tie into Google Cloud, and I create a lifecycle as part of that. So when Joe Schmuckatelli over here at the Boston office leaves, we want to not only remove his Workspace account or save it or whatever we want to do, compliance reasons, we want to make sure he can't access Google Cloud as well. So we want to go ahead and provision those resources in whatever manner. So we want a life cycle as part of that. So the organization provides that. It also provides a top-down approach. Whereas with the if we use projects, then that would be sort of different, where we would have a bunch of different project administrators and no central control. So that's really important to realize. Now, from a domain structure, we'd have like mycompanya.com. Then we would have folders. Now, folders we would tie in as a way to share resources between different business units, projects, etc. Not all companies use folders. It's more of an optional approach, depending on the use case. And then we have different projects like Project 1, Project 2. So for example, production, QA, development, test, whatever, right? So the resource is a root node of the Google organization that we're going to set up. Now, it is associated with Workspace or Cloud Identity. Now, the Google Workspace super admin is actually the one responsible for the ownership of the organization, not the Google Cloud administrator. That's important to realize. Now, resources are organized from a hierarchy. Basically, the organization is the top, and projects are the first level. And projects always contain resources. And some notes there. Okay, so let's talk about a project. So it's important to talk about a project and sort of show you how it works, how to create one so you have an idea. But basically, the goal of a project is to segment our resources, so like create a sandbox. And when we create that sandbox, that allows us to basically have development resources here, have chargeback, have quotas, have a strict IAM structure, and then let's say development and QA. So the goal of the project is to track resources, enable billing, manage permissions, and then enable services and APIs. So for example, if I deploy a project for development, I might give them access to App Engine, but I might not give access to production to App Engine. And again, just a simple example of why a project can be very powerful in maintaining control of your infrastructure. Now, folders, basically, we could set up with IAM, and it's a way to sort of provide granularity. So for example, I might want to share this cloud storage bucket with only specific users in specific projects. And one way to mitigate that is to use what's called a folder. And this would be similar to like AWS directory service, for example. Okay, some test tips there. And let's go to a demo here. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Any questions so far? Nope. Okay, great. All right, so let's go ahead and create a project and walk through some of the components of our project and talk about why it's so important. All right, so it is important, like for here, you can see I have 2 projects. Now, in this project here, Google Analytics, which I'm in, you can see the project you're in by looking at what it says up top, so you know that automatically. And then I could change that project to this project. So you see here, like under Compute Engine and App Engine, and then SQL and other resources, this is a little different than if I go over here to Google Analytics. And again, the layout's different because I have a different dashboard. So now what I want to do is go over here to SQL. And if I create an instance, you'll see I'm in Google Analytics, for example. Now, maybe this is going to be a service that might not make sense to have Google Analytics or GKE, like that was a class I was teaching before. I want to create a new project. So before I do anything, I want to go over here to create a new project. I'm going to call this project basically GCP demo project. Now, it is important to realize that I can always change the project name later, but I can't change the project ID later. So I need to either change it now, or I could ask Google to give me an idea, and this will give me a new name. Or I could just go over here and just type in GCP project demo 1, 2, 3, 4, and that'll be my project ID for that. Now, there's also a project number that'll be created, which you don't see. This is basically what's used by Google in the back end for basically provisioning and management and billing. So remember, I could always change the project name. Project ID, I can only change at creation. Now, if I had an organization set up, I would go ahead and search that. If I had like a workspace domain available, I would add that. And then I could put that project under that organization. I'm gonna go ahead and create that. And that'll take a minute to finish. It's like it's already done. Okay. So now I just created a new project right there, GCP demo project. So I'm going to go to that now. What I want to do is I want to deploy SQL. And I'm going to just deploy a SQL instance. But because I haven't used SQL before in this project, it's a new project, I have to enable APIs first. So what I want to do is enable the API. And that'll take a minute to boot, to sort of sync up. Then I want to go back over here, let that finish. I need to go over to Compute Engine. And I need to do the same thing, basically. See over here, I have to enable the API. Now, the API is the application programming interface. This is what allows us to have that effectively connectivity with the service and other services. Basically, again, that on-ramp to the cloud and the service. So that'll go ahead and take a second to get started. Okay, so while that's running, that probably should be done with SQL by now. Okay, so that's good. So I go create an instance, choose my SQL, and no, it didn't finish yet. That's the strangest thing. I have seen it. Okay, it did finish. It just didn't sync up. So again, sometimes it can take 2 or 3 minutes. Sometimes it might be a minute. You never know. Okay, so it is enabled. Now I want to call this the demo instance 1. I'm going to put in a password. And then I could select like my version of SQL. I'm going to leave it as a default. I could leave it highly available or a single zone. In this case, this is more for demo purposes. I'm just going to deploy it in a single zone. And then I have a multitude of other customizations I could do to the instance, like backups, storage, and labels and all that. Just to get this started, I just want to deploy this so that you could have something to view. All right, so that instance is going to start up. I can then connect to the instance if I want. I could also open this in Cloud Shell as well. And again, a lot of things I could do with that. All right, so while that's getting started, I'd like to go back. And you can see here, this gives me the login to the SQL instance. And again, it's not fully up, so that's why you need to wait a minute or two. Okay, so let's go to Compute Engine, and I'm going to deploy one here as well. All right, so what I want to do now is I'm going to deploy this one in South Carolina. I'm going to call this instance 2. I'm going to leave the same just for, again, demo purposes, allow web service, and then create. So again, this will get started. Let's go back to the main project that I had. And I already have that VM running. Okay, so we'll let that get started. And so I want to check one thing here. Okay, so now that, just want to see if that's going to kick in. Okay, let me go ahead and bring up this. So I want to customize, I want to add compute engine to that. Okay. All right. Okay, now what we did is, again, we created a project and then we added resources to the project. So basically that allows us to segment resources, provision resources for a specific business unit, a use case, DevOps, pipelines, whatever we want to use that specific project for. So for example, in a lot of organizations, we might have just 3 or 4 projects just for our pipeline. So we might have production, development, QA, and test. And then we could, then provision our resources and permissions so that when development, sends a main line down the flow, it can go one way, we can't send it back the other or whatever, right? Or certain users only have access to certain projects. And that gives us the power to really manage basically our DevOps processes in a controlled manner. Okay, so that's a project. Now, and we also know under the project, we can add resources. All right, and then over here, for those that are new to Google Cloud, I want to point this out. Google does have tutorials over here, so you go and explore the tutorials. If there's something you want to deploy or view, they've got compute engine, cloud storage, and there's tutorials on how to deploy a website, run a VM, build a mobile app, on and on and on. So it's all about, again, understanding where the resources are so that you're able to get started efficiently, right? So they have provided that. Sometimes it's not obvious if you don't scroll down. Documentation is located over here. There's also over here a status dashboard in Google Cloud. So the status dashboard provides you insight into any downed services. So if there's an issue with Apogee or API Gateway, it would tell you a status if there's any issues. So today there's really nothing going on, so that's a good thing. Okay, and one of the things that I'd recommend too is for someone new to Google Cloud is to get started with some of these, but go over here to like build a pre-deployed solution. So this is the cloud marketplace. This is similar to the AWS marketplace or the Azure marketplace. So basically these are ready-made applications. Some are free, some are cost. So for example, if I want to deploy Jenkins, for example, I can go over here and I can search, any of these templates for Jenkins. So I go ahead and deploy a Jenkins on containers. I can deploy Jenkins on a virtual machine. Some of these you'll want to look at, like for example, this one here, I think. It'll tell you about it. It'll tell you about the cost. So to use this, you'll need, of course, have Windows Server 2016, which I think probably would likely be phased out in a lot of data centers, but maybe still around, I don't know. But again, you can see here that the cost for running this template would be about $82 a month. There is an infrastructure fee. There's a usage fee as well for running the template. So you'll want to check out those costs. And then over here, click to deploy VMs. Like the cost of this is, about $50 a month. And then you just would launch it basically, which is a fairly simple process. Okay. All right, so let's get back to the presentation. Questions? Let me see. Nope, nothing there. Okay. Okay, so that should share now. All right, now, again, if this was an 8-hour class, we go through several exercises with you, give you some lab time or whatever you call it. For time purposes, we don't have the time for that. Let's talk about service options. Now, with Google Cloud, there's a ton of different services available. And again, it's about understanding what service is appropriate for your use case. So whether it's IoT, ML, compute, Google probably has a service. So here is a fairly updated service option list. So it lists all the compute, storage, networking, big data, machine learning, developer tools, monitoring, security and access. So again, right, there's a lot here to learn. You're not going to need to know all of these for the exam. Matter of fact, even if you're a cloud engineer, you may only use 30, 40% of these in your environment in a lot of cases. So it all depends. But again, as you can see, there's a lot of services. All right, now there is a pricing calculator that you go ahead and view and look at. Again, you know, fairly straightforward. It's very different than AWS's. The way, I think there's 2 available with AWS and Azure, but this is a little different. And the way it works is, again, fairly straightforward. I'll show you that here right now. But again, like I was showing you earlier, with like compute, for example, Google tells you the estimated cost automatically. Here's my screen. It is okay. All right, so Google does have a pricing calculator. And the pricing calculator is right here. And you can see that they have basically the services start here, and you'll want to just, you know, click over this way. Now, this, of course, is very different than AWS's. It's a totally different view and layout, but it's still the same in a lot of respects. You're just configuring things to how you want to have priced. So for example, here, if I want to go compute engine, I put in like the number of instances that I need, what are they for, what kind of software and OS do I need, for example. And then again, I might want to use the free templates to minimize my costs, so I only pay for, you know, the hardware usage basically. Now, machine class is it now. One of the things in Google is we have what's called preemptible. This is similar, but not to like an AWS spot instance. Now, we know in AWS they have spot instances. They typically work on an auction basis, and basically you'll have to go to like the website for spot instances and see what's available in what region. And then you only get like a certain amount of time before they're sort of like killed. So it's like, you know, 6 hours or 4 hours or whatever it is, I forgot. And then you bid on them. So you have to bid on them typically. Whereas like Google has something similar, but there's no like auction place. There's no updated spreadsheet or anything that you have to look at or website to go to. So preemptible is a discounted virtual machine like a spot instance, but it's not auction based, and you don't have to worry about if you win or not, right? Because with spot instance, you put in a bid, you may or may not get that bid accepted. Whereas in Google, you're just going to pay the lowest price they're going to give you, and you could use that VM for up to 24 hours.
And it is preemptible. In other words, Google does reserve the right to sort of terminate that like a spot instance in AWS. So basically you have up to 24 hours and it's, not like a couple hours, it's 24 hours. And in most cases, there's never an issue, but you don't want to use a preemptible instance for production or anything, of course. It's great for like a batch file, running a query or something that might take a few hours. That's what a preemptible instance is for. Now, to show you that, to configure a preemptible instance, we would just go over here to Compute Engine and that out of the way. Go to Create Instance, and we would just simply go down over here and go to over here to I always fuse this. Yeah, over here. Oops. Yeah, right here. And it's funny because they changed some of the look again. Like it's like every month you log into this, something just doesn't look right again. Okay, so it is under availability policy. You can see here now it says preemptibility, and you want to go over here to either on or off. So by default, preemptibility is off. And we want to go over here to turn it on. And basically, that's going to, if you look over here, that's $8.34. And that's based on an hourly basis. And if I go over here to turn this off, and again, you can see that the price goes to $25. So preemptibility does give you a lot cheaper price. It's like in this case for this image, it's about what? 8 divided 24, about 30-something%, right? 33%. And that can vary based on the resources in that region. I've seen the cost as low as 80% discount. It just depends on the resources available in that region. I will say, like Northern Virginia, it's pretty hard to find preemptible instances in a lot of cases. So it all depends on the region and zone you're in. So like in this case, I am in Iowa, for example. So that's preemptibility. And then again, what I would do is just turn that on, and you can see here, it doesn't, allow me to set additional maintenance policies or anything like that. And then I would just go ahead and create it, and that would run for 24 hours. And then also too, one thing, for those that are using any free trial credits or free tier credits, it will allow you to use that for these instances as well. So just be aware of that. And it tells you if it qualifies for the free tier or not. So just be aware of that. So that's one thing I did want to point out. Whereas like if you go to AWS's console, when you go to the AMI, it has that little free tier eligible notification there. And this is how you would figure out the same thing in Google Cloud. It'll tell you if it's eligible or not. Now, if I go over here to, let's say, compute optimized, you'll see that that'll jump to 16. And if I go down here, that it still lets me use that surprisingly. Usually it doesn't. So maybe resources just are a little bit tight, not as tight as they were. So over here, let me go to, oops. Just want to check one thing, South Carolina, and US East 1B. Okay, and then if I go over here, okay, so yeah, sometimes that always is not going to be the case. So just be aware, that's how you check to see if you could use your free credits or tier for that matter. Now, if I turn that off, you can see that now that price jumps to 122. And then memory optimized, again, $5,000. And then if I scroll down here, again, it'll maybe let me use a day worth, but then it'll charge me after. So again, pay attention to if it will let you use that or not. It all depends on, again, the region, the zone, and what you have available for credits. Okay, now also too, when you sign up for your free tier, you'll see up here, if you have credits available, you'll see another icon. And it's like, I think it's like I don't know, like a dollar or coin sign. And it'll sort of tell you you have a remaining balance in your free tier. I've already used mine well over, so I can only use free tier resources, which is 750 hours of a VM. Okay, so that brings up another point I was going to cover. Since I just talked about it, let's finish this, and I want to talk about one more thing on the free tier. Okay, so go over here. Let's say I want 100 VMs. I want to deploy that in Iowa or South Carolina. Do I want committed usage or not? So committed usage is sort of like in AWS. We have reserved instances where we're committing to 1 or 3 years of a relationship with the provider. So I could go 1 year, let's say. And then do I need GPUs, and what is the node type? And just a lot of things to add, right? Do I need persistent disk? TPUs. So TPUs are TensorFlow processing units. So if you're going to use TensorFlow, that's mainly your AI and ML fun stuff, right? If you're going to be using that, then you want to identify that. So, and again, you go ahead and select all this when you do that. So I'm going to add this to the estimate. And you can see there that it added that to the estimate. Then I want to go over here, and let's say I want to use GKE. Then I put in like the number of nodes that I might want to use, any information that I want. I'm just going to add this so you can see how it adds everything up and presents it. And then over here, I can email the estimate. You can also save it as well. So if I go email, I put in the email, and then I just send it. So again, it gives me that option. Also, too, I copy this as well, and then also send the link. Okay, lastly, I think I wanted to talk about the free tier, one more thing. Yeah, I think so. All right, one more quick note on that. So if you go over here, if you go down here, like for example, let's look at compute engine. So the free tier is only an E2 micro instance. So for example, if I go back over here, this is actually sort of interesting. It doesn't seem like, yeah, E2, right there, the E2 micro. So that's actually in your free tier. And then what should happen, it looks like something isn't right with this. That should be changing, it shouldn't be showing, but I don't know. They make changes and sometimes it just doesn't work out. So this will tell you, but in reality, you can use your $300 free credit, but the free, they're always free basically that they have, the free tier. That again, only that one instance type, which is the E2 mini or micro. All right, so just be aware of that. So sometimes I'm not sure, this doesn't look like it's totally accurate because I don't actually have any free credits left, unless they just gave me some that I'm not aware of. So that should sort of be incorrect. So just be aware of that. So pay attention to that. It's only for, again, in this case, an E2 micro. If you go over that, this is when, like if you use a small or any other type of machine config, if you have the $300 credit, you could use it. But I don't have it, so, and I could show you that as well. So if I go over here to billing, so if I go over billing here, you could see overview. Current month, my average cost was like $18 a month, you know, 124 last month. And again, you know, that's why I shut down services. So you have to pay attention, otherwise you will be billed for that. So my month-to-date cost is there. And if you had, you know, any free tier, it would sort of tell you that over here, typically. And then you could also break this down over under payment as well, and go over to reports. And again, you could break this down. By SKUs over here, oh, over here, yeah, down here. So you go over here to discounts, and it would show you any discounts, and that would include the free tier, for example. And another thing that we want to do typically is we always want to create, like in AWS, we have a budget we could create. We want to also do that in Google. So the budget is going to basically let us sort of keep an eye on our spending. So basically I go over here and I create, you know, I don't know, monthly alerts, and I'll do it monthly. I'll say all projects, all services, and then promotions. This is going to be like your free credits and your, you know, so they break this down a little different. Let me see, promotion. Yeah, this is your free trial credit or grants as well that you might get. Now, also too, I was saying with Google Education, you can get additional credits. And I think there's discounts on vouchers as well. There used to be. So I'm going to check that before I forget. I know I had mentioned that. So I go next, and then I put in a target amount, let's say $100. And then what I could do over here is I could say, okay, so here's an example. Let's say I left 10 VMs running, and 8 of them aren't going to be running after like the weekend. I want to be alerted the first week, or you know, after I get 25% of my budget. So let's say if my spending is 100 or 1,000, whatever it is, I want to put in 25% of that budget amount, so that within the first week, let's say, I'll be notified if I'm going over my budget. So if my budget's $100 and I'm spending $50 the first month, the first week of the month, that's not going to be good. So that means I'll be spending $200 a month, when in reality, I want to target less than 100. So these are things that you can set up, right? So you go ahead and figure, you know, play around with this, and this will pre-program that like 50%. And you could change this to whatever you want, and then manage notifications here. And so that'll create a budget. Now, I believe you get, so let me just double check this, because it's like I said, sometimes it is a moving target. I believe you get 2 in Google, so you can set up 2 budgets in Google for free. And then like AWS, they charge you after you go over so many. Whatever that number is, you know, not too concerned for this exam, but for the engineer exam, you want to know that it's 2 at least the time that I'm talking about. So you want to just double check things like that, right? So you can set up like 2 budgets without a cost, from my understanding. Okay, so setting a budget does not cap resources or API consumption. Okay, so what that's just telling you is, you know, that's not going to go against your consumption if you're going to use the API or set it up. So just be aware of that. Okay, so over here, there is some, oh yeah, it also says when you set up a budget, it doesn't like prevent the spending. In other words, it's up to you to review the budget alerts that you get and then stop the billing, right? You know, turn out services. So that's what that's saying. So again, there's a lot of stuff you can read here. I'll leave it up to you to just, you know, review this if this is of interest. Okay, so that's under that. How are we doing on time? 11:30, okay. So let's go back to the slides. We want to just speed it up a little bit. I want to go through some of the services. Also too, in the GitHub repository are exercises that you could do, so check that out. Okay, so the billing model with Google Cloud is again set up for basically allowing you to create a top tier account, but also have separate billing methods if you want as well. So basically a billing account is a resource that we're going to use and manage inside of the console. Now there's two types of billing accounts with self-serve and invoiced. So self-service is, where you have your credit card online and you're billed automatically. Invoiced is offline. This is done by Google Billing, and you have to be approved for it. You have to be a large company. You need a good amount of cloud spending for them to want to do invoices with you. I don't know what that number is. I was told it was, about $1.5 million a year before Google would probably set up a PO system with you. So with that said, it's, based on, your relationship with Google. But if you have a small amount of cloud spending, like $100,000 a year or something, they're not going to bother with that usually. There's two payment profiles, as an individual and also a business. Charging cycles. So Google charges monthly, but also threshold. So what does that mean? Well, it means that they'll charge you every month, and then when you reach a certain threshold, you're also billed as well. So once you reach like $1,000 in costs, they're going to bill you. So that's basically how that works. So now also too, that threshold is determined by your relationship with Google. So if you're new to Google, you've only been with them a year, they're not going to give you a $10,000 limit on your cloud spending before they bill you. It's just, these are things you have to work out with your account team, I guess. But just be aware that that's typically how that works. So remember that there is a monthly billing and then also a threshold. Now, billing discounts. So you do have options for billing discounts in Google. So we have sustained, committed use, discounts for preemptible VMs. So for example, like with sustained use discounts, this is really meant for an organization that goes over, for example, like 46% usage of the VM in the month. I think it's 46, 48. It's just under 50%. And once you reach that threshold, Google automatically lowers your cost for you. Then there's committed use. This is like your reserved instances in AWS. Then there's also preemptible VMs as well, which we talked about. So we have sustained use. I'm going to, again, for time purposes, we would spend a little bit more time on this, but we're going to move on a little bit. This is, again, it's 1 or 3 years, very similar to AWS, right? And then capacity reservation. So this is a little different. One thing that we could do is we could purchase a guarantee that we're going to have a resource available in a region that we want to be in. So really tight regions like Northern Virginia, for example, maybe you want to have a guaranteed reservation where if you want to spin up resources, you're basically, I like to compare this to sort of like having a membership so that you can play golf on Members Day. It's really all they're doing is they're sort of charging you for the privilege to get that benefit to use a resource when it might not be available. It's a way for companies to avoid surge issues or whatever that might occur. This is very common to see with like e-commerce sites because they need to make sure that, Black Friday and all this sort of, they're gonna have resources available, right? Then we have inferred. So this is a little different. I don't think AWS or Azure has anything similar to this that I can remember seeing or my experience is seeing. And it's called inferred. So what this does is it takes the same machine used in the same zone and it combines it into a single charge and increases your discount. So for example, with Google, they have a form of step billing that can be implemented with your Google sales team as well. So let's say once you deploy, let's say 100 VMs in that month, and you use it over 50% of the month, instead of getting charged $8, let's say, per VM a month, you're charged $6 per VM per month. That's an inferred instance. That's when you hit that threshold. Google says, we love you for using us. We want to help you. We're going to lower your cost. So the discount is applied to the virtual machines effectively. And again, I don't know of any other providers that do that sort of voluntarily give you a discount without asking. Okay, compliance. Compliance is always fun, right? We love compliance. GDPR is wonderful, and HIPAA and PCI, great time, right? Just kidding. But what I'm getting at here is on the exam, there's going to be some areas of compliance you want. The main thing is to understand why we need compliance. So compliance could be to meet issues for legislation, regulations, that is, laws. Also, if you're in a framework, for example, let's say you have FedRAMP, if you're a government customer, or if you're a credit card processing merchant, maybe PCI is something you have to follow. These are things that you'll have to think about. Now, there's 3 resources that you go to. There is what's called the Compliance Report Manager. This is where we go to get sort of an update on compliance on Google. And then the GDPR Resource Center is where we go to get information on GDPR. Again, you may get a question on compliance. And again, that's about the extent that you're going to see. Okay, support. Let me just check one thing. I updated this. I might want to make sure I have the right version of this. Let me check. I know they updated this like 3 months ago, and I know I updated in one of my versions of the course. I just want to double check if I did here or not. Again, this is the pleasure of doing Google Cloud courses. They love to make you work for Google. Okay. All right, so yeah, if you go to Google Support Hub, there is, I'm just checking quickly here. All right, so it is basic, standard, enhanced, and premium. Okay, so this is the updated slide. Okay, I just want to double check. Because like when I took the beta exam, like literally it was probably March. It was March, it wasn't even a year ago now that I think about it. Probably March or April. And their support was actually different. And so when I developed content, when I released it, about a month later, someone says, hey, you want to check your support information. And sure as heck, they're right. They changed the whole support program. So this is actually correct now. So just be aware, when going to the exam, there's 4 tiers of support. There's basic, standard, and enhanced, and premium. Now, what type of support would you get? A technical account manager? That would be premium. What support is free? Basic. This is the level of questions you'll get, right? Nothing particularly difficult around support. Okay, SLAs. Okay. SLAs are service level agreements. Now, this service level agreement is basically a contract between you and a provider. So, the end user and the provider. Now, there's three types. There's customer-based, service-based, and multi-level. The important, that you really want to know with Google is that each of the services has its own SLA. I'll show you that here quickly. So for example, here, this is an example of an SLA, basically around uptime percentage. So this is the service, basically, for example, in Google, if the service is up 99% to 99.5%, they'll give you a discount on your bill of 10%. Now, the fun part is you have to notice this. Google, AWS, Azure, all the cloud providers do not automatically give you the discount. You have to ask for it. So you have to put in a support call and say, hey, this service is down for like 8 hours this day. So for example, and I had a customer that was last year with the S3 outage, or not even this year actually, well last year, it was only a few months ago, where they had, data on S3. So if you had data on S3 and they're down for 6 or 8 hours, you're entitled to that discount. However, they don't automatically give you that discount because the way the provider looks at it is, well, maybe the resource, you're paying for it, but that doesn't mean you're using it. So if you're not using it, then you're not entitled to a discount. So you have to notice it to let them know, and then they'll give you your discount on your bill. So you have to put in a support call. So a lot of people don't realize that. Okay, so the uptime percentage is the total number of minutes in a month minus, again, the amount of time that service is down. So we want to know what a service level agreement is. Now, there's what is called the Google Cloud Adoption Framework, and there's a maturity model as well. What I'd like to do is go back over here to this desktop, and also if you go to, I don't know if I put that in the download or not. I might not have, but I'll give you the link for it. Let me pull it up. So this is the link you'd want to go to. Okay, let me share my screen here. Okay, so this is the Google Cloud Adoption Framework. So this document's really important for the exam because a lot of the information comes out of the maturity model that Google uses, I should say. And basically there's 4 levels to the scale. There's learn, lead, scale, secure. Then there's epics. So epics in the world of Google Cloud basically are saying these are like tenants is another way to look at it. So these are basically like what would be called sort of like areas of focus that we want to practice. So we want to look at resource management, incident management, people operations, communications, working together, right? That's really what the epics are. And down here is basically additional, what are called definitions of terms to look at. If you go back up here, you definitely need to read this document and understand at a high level the 4 themes and 3 phases. There's in my ebook, did I give that to you? Let me check. I just want to double check because sometimes I give it out, sometimes I don't. Again, the challenge with developing content is that it takes a lot of time and you generally don't get compensated well. Okay, yeah. So yeah, so this version of the ebook is available. And if you go to this ebook, these are some practice questions that have been put together. And what I did is there's 50 questions, and basically go over here. I get an updated version. I'll add it to the GitHub. Just give me a couple hours when I get done here. And yeah, so if you just review this, like, what does this mean? So these are questions that you're going to run into on the exam. Like your development team. Now, of course, I can't give you the exact questions that I got. I have to be reasonable in how I word them so that they don't seem like I'm copying them. Google would not appreciate that. So basically, like your team's been doing this. You want to migrate to Google Cloud. You want to use a data warehouse. Why would you use BigQuery? And what would be some of the reasons? So the questions here are not going to be like the cloud engineer, cloud architect exam, which are going to be much more technical, where you need to know like the speeds and feeds or anything. This is more like, can you explain why BigQuery is the right choice, right? That's all they really are looking for. Again, you can see here, you're currently considering, you see like the statement, it's 2, 3, sometimes some of the longer questions might be 3 or 4 sentences. Machine learning, here's a long one. See, here's some long ones you might get. Again, not the exact question, but a little similar in format. Again, this is what you're going to run into on the exam. And this is what I was saying earlier. This is going to be harder than the cloud practitioner. So just be aware of that. Has anyone taken the practitioner? I don't know. Did I ask that or not? Or we'll just see. No one? Okay, no worries. So again, that's there for you taking. So check that out. All right, so let's go ahead and finish up this lesson that we're in. We'll take a break, and then we're going to wrap up about 1 o'clock today. And again, the recording will be available as well. And then you'll have, you'll also have as well the content, of course. Okay, so. Okay. All right, so we want to know, of course, what the adoption framework is, the maturity model, assessment. There's actually an assessment as well you want to look at. So there's a lot there to cover, of course. Now, the adoption framework is used to help you as a digital leader, basically, identify, the proper cloud adoption activities that you need to look at to go from not being in the cloud to going to the cloud. And again, the paperwork is, that link is right here for you to look at. Now, there's also additional maturity models out there, like the Open Alliance for Cloud Adoption has a framework as well. And again, there's the adoption framework that's with Google. That link is there as well. So if you want to become a cloud-first organization, they want you to understand the foundational themes that your organization needs to sort of excel at. The first is you should always learn about cloud. And then we should have someone in the organization sort of leading the charge to go to the cloud. And then once we're in the cloud, we want to sort of build up that cloud presence. And then after we get into the cloud, we want to make sure it's secure, right? That's sort of the goal of the cloud first organization. So if you see cloud first organization, you know that they're sort of focused on the, basically the themes that we just talked about. Now, the maturity assessment, there's an assessment you go through as well. It's online. I'll let you go ahead and look at it. The link is in that document, the framework document as well. You go ahead and check it out. But basically, the assessment is sort of put together to give you insight. It is interactive. It is sort of cool. Actually, why don't I just give you the link and I'll let you check it out. And it's similar to AWS's, I think, as well, a little bit, but not really. It's, again, Google and AWS do things 2 different ways. But again, the goal is the same, right? To make sure that you're ready for the cloud. All right, so the link is here. And so let me put that in the chat for you. And up at the top right of the page is a start button. That's sort of the interactive basic assessment that your organization could go through. It'll probably take you 40 minutes or so to go through. So it is a little bit lengthy, but again, it's there for you to understand where you're at and where you need to go as well. So the foundational themes, learn, lead, scale, secure are there. Now, again, there's 3 phases to the maturity model effectively as well. There's tactical, strategic, and transformational. It is important to realize that our organization may be, for example, in the tactical phase where we're sort of like just getting ready, we're working with the cloud, we're not really transforming, our processes or anything yet. Again, it's, depending on where we're at. Again, I encourage you to read the framework, look at the assessment to make sure you get, again, to go through typically just this section, I would need an hour and a half. We're gonna limit this to basically probably another 10 minutes for today. All right, so again, the goal of the assessment is to provide, analysis and provide you a report. Now, to access GCP, there's basically 3 main ways to access GCP. There's a console. There's also a cloud shell that you could download actually, there's a cloud shell in the browser, but there's also an SDK kit that you download to your desktop that has the APIs and CLI services built in. So you can connect from your desktop, for example, or your server to Google Cloud. All right, so we covered basically the benefits of using Google Cloud, the organizational structure, the infrastructure as well, like regions and zones. We also talked about what an organization is, IAM folders. We also know the billing methods that Google uses as well. And we also learned that a cloud billing account, we're gonna go ahead and manage in the console. All right, so some practice questions here. What are the 3 ways that we can interact with the cloud platform? Again, CLI, SDK, and console. A blank is a physical location around the world where clusters, where GCP clusters their data centers. And we know that's the region, right? Now, a billing account is a cloud level resource managed in what? Do we manage it with the CLI, the SDK, an application, or the console? It would be the console, right? Again, pretty straightforward stuff, a lot of this, not meant to be tricky. Okay, so the organization, the hierarchy, I should say, of GCP is broken into organizations, folders, projects, and zones. So again, we want to be aware of that before we take the exam. And resources, I said zones by accident. Okay. All right, so break time. So let's talk about, let's see here. So let me see what we have. Okay, yeah, so let's take a 5-minute break and then we'll get done about 1 o'clock. I've got a meeting I have to run to after 1. So again, the goal was to finish between 1 and 2. So I think we're in good shape. So So we'll cover the major services and some of the software development and security capabilities that you want to know for the exam. And in the meantime, let me, before we take a break, before I forget this, let me give you the link here. For signing up here. Okay, again, for those that are interested in taking the online version with all the demos and all that, where I sort of can walk through everything. It's like 7 hours or whatever. I'll give you access to that. I just need you to sign up with your email basically, and then I'll match it to this meetup, and I'll give you I'll actually give you access to all the Google Cloud resources, which is significant. I actually have a cool course coming out next week on Google Cloud FinOps, which is sort of a new course that I haven't seen anyone else do. So sort of different in that respect. Okay. Yep, no worries. Thanks, Maurice. And let me share my screen and pull up the right one this time. Okay. Okay. So if you go over to techcommanders.com, what you want to do is go down over here. So I have, tons of courses in different areas, but the Google Cloud courses I'll give you access to. So you'll have access to next month we have, for those that are going to interview with Google Cloud, roles, there'll be specific, courses on coaching and preparation around that. So basically interview preparation is what it's going to be. So also to the content for the Associate Engineer Bootcamp, Kubernetes Engine, networking, architect, the developer, practice questions as well, on and on and on. So there's a lot of Google Cloud courses, DevOps. So the cloud, the digital leader is right here. It's in the middle. And so the course itself is going to, of course, cover everything in much more detail. And again, that is there for those that, if you do miss, like, for example, some of the demos we have to skip over. If you want to see that, how do you use App Engine or how do you use Kubernetes Engine, that'll be there. Okay, so what you want to do is, again, go over here to Tech Commanders, and I think it's under pricing. Yeah, right here. So just go select Get Started, the free trial, enter your email, and if your name and email match up to what I see, I'll give you full access. Then also too, you have access to these courses as well. And I actually just added 3 more to the tier as well. I just didn't update this. So you'll have access to GCP for AWS professionals, blockchain, CompTIA Cloud Plus, and then some practice exams for cloud engineer. Okay, and then I also have the AWS Cloud Foundations or Cloud was AWS Practitioner. I should say I added that as well to the free tier. I just need to update the page. So you just enter your email here. I'll add you tonight if I see your email added. So that's my gift to you for those that want to learn some more. Okay, so let's take a 5-minute break, and I'll see you back in 5 minutes. And most of the time will be demos. To be honest, I won't spend a lot of time on the slides. We'll just walk through as many demos as I can get through.
Hey, Joe.
Yes, hello.
Oh, Joe, I'm looking at your on your website about the daily cloud interview ACE. So I
Yes.
just have to sign up on that one. So this
Oh,
is like
yeah,
a weekly thing or what?
yeah, that'll be a daily email that you'll get for practice,
Right.
preparation. It's not just Google, it'll be like AWS and Azure and sort of hybrid as well. That's going to be released next week. So that'll be available starting like next Wednesday, basically.
Yeah, because I started kind of like looking at how Amazon, AWS go through their interview process.
Yes.
So they kind of like, I know their emphasis is on their principle, like their, what is it called? The leadership principle that they do. So you go through some kind of a behavioral interview as far and technical interview. That's how they go through.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'll sign up. I think I'm gonna sign up also. Also you mentioned about the because I got also interested on the cost management, and I on and off I did join some of the conference on FinApps.
Okay.
So you said you're having some kind of similar webinar coming up.
Yeah. So we do plan on having a FinOps seminar coming up. Not, I don't know what we call a seminar, but a meetup basically. So that I'm trying to work with another speaker to sort of do. I could do it. I just, I'm doing a lot already. So I'm trying to get some other speakers that would be interested in doing that. So that probably won't be until April, maybe.
Oh, okay.
Because we're
All
sort
right.
of booked up until April, to be honest.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Okay, welcome back. All right, so let's get started. We've got about 55 minutes, and I'm gonna basically skip most of the PowerPoint because it's all like services. There's a few I'm gonna go through here in a few minutes, and we'll cover that, but I wanted to focus mainly on the major services that you'll see on the exam. Like, you'll need to know what BigQuery is, and you'll need to know Cloud SQL. You'll need to know cloud storage, what a virtual private cloud is. And that's really, the goal is to understand, should I use this over this service? And also too, cloud functions and cloud run, the DevOps services. And again, the exam's not going to test you technically on it, but you do need to know, oh, okay, Compute Engine is a compute service for a virtual machine. But if I want to deploy containers, maybe I want to use Kubernetes engine, right? That's the goal. Now, I had promised to give everybody a preview here of, and I love some feedback too. So if you wouldn't mind taking, a quick second to put in the chat any thoughts on this, basically, that would be great. And so let me see here. So
did you ever want to get into cloud computing?
This is the short little, I think it's this screen actually. There it is. Okay. So yeah, I just had this done, and I know I was just trying to, again, some feedback. It looks like it was done really well. I do have actors that'll be doing a commercial as well. So that'll be sort of an interesting process. But this is like 40 seconds or so.
Did you ever want to get into cloud computing? Becoming a cloud computing professional can lead to a career that is both financially and technically rewarding. The demand for cloud computing professionals is constantly growing, and companies are looking for these professionals in record numbers. Becoming a cloud professional does not require a college degree, and the best part is that entry-level roles are consistently available in less than 6 months of preparation. One of the best ways to get started is to get prepared with the best training and then prepare for interview with an experienced coach. TECHCOMMANDERS is here to help you go from knowing nothing about cloud to a cloud superhero. Join TECHCOMMANDERS and Cloud Interview Ace today. It will change your life.
So yeah, sure. Well, that was like the first version. Yeah, so yeah, if you have some comments, I'd love to hear it. Okay, so let's now get into the demo part. But there's one thing I need to cover actually on the slide here before we get started. And that screen. One second. Okay, I think that's it. Should be it. All right, so this section here, again, there's a lot here. I want to cover basically the compute services. I want to cover the disk services like storage. I want to try to get into some of the security and data offerings as well. But there's also some other areas that you want to get into, like migration, application modernization. Also, too, some other areas that will be on the exam will be around data ingestion, AI, machine learning, software development lifecycle is also fair tested. Oddly enough, SD-WAN will be on there. I just was a little surprised that that was thrown in there. But again, you might run into that. And then there's some review questions as well that you'll probably want to look at as well. Okay, so the goal, again, for the remaining time is I just want to focus on, some of the demos. If there's any questions you might have, let me know. Be happy to answer them. And let's go ahead and go to the demo. Okay, great. Thanks, Maurice. Appreciate that. All right. And then actually, I'll take a minute and I'll talk about the exam process and what you can expect taking the exam as well. Okay, I think that's sharing now. Okay, great. All right, now there's a course, if you look over here, each of these areas, there's all kinds of, different services. You're not going to be able to memorize all these or learn all these in a day. There's just so many, right? And also too, I always find it always interesting. This is a challenge to me too. When I first started using Google Cloud, when I started learning Google Cloud, was some of the services, like the names were pretty similar, like BigQuery and, Big Table. Okay, well, BigQuery, Big Table sort of sounds the same to me, right? Well, how do you memorize the difference, right? So these are some of the things that you'll have to just get over on the exam, because you don't want to, pick a data warehouse over a SQL database, for example, just because you confuse a name, for example. So this is sort of the challenge I think that might come up. Okay, now when it comes to Google Cloud and this exam specifically, you'll want to get an idea around, for example, what the marketplace is. Now, I think I touched on this briefly, but the marketplace, again, is where you go to find, a solution. A solution being could be DevOps or compute or databases or a WordPress site that you want to deploy, whatever it is, to sort of launch it and have it pre-configured for you, and allows you to not have to configure like with WordPress. You'd have to configure a LAMP stack and go in and set up WordPress and add folders and all that, right? With, for example, here, what this does is you go over here to WordPress. This will just let you pick a template that you could deploy. And there's any number of templates. Like, for example, you can deploy them on containers or on a virtual machine. And then basically, I usually like the Bitnami ones, for example. And they've added quite a few here. So anyways, like if you go over here to the one from Bitnami, you go ahead and launch that, and you go over here again. This tells you about the cost for the resources. There is no fee, of course, for WordPress, and to worry about that. It's just you're just paying for the resource usage. And then when you deploy this, this will go ahead and launch it. For example, basically, you have to enable your APIs, for example. It's going to use Deployment Manager. So Deployment Manager is Google's infrastructure as a service solution, basically, or an infrastructure as code solution, I should be specific there. Very similar to CloudFormation, for example, if you're familiar with AWS. So what you do here is you just go over here, configure this however you want, and you can add specific. Now, of course, you need to have HTTP at least enabled, of course, WordPress, because WordPress doesn't do any good without it. Just be aware of that. Now, what's cool about this is over here, what it's going to do is install a Debian image. So basically, it's going to use similar like in Amazon, a machine image, an AMI. But in Google, it's basically a machine image. And over here, it'll install WordPress for you, Akaset, and basically a LAMP stack, with Linux, Apache, Python, PHP, all that, right? So it'll put this all in here for you, and then basically bring up a ready-made website. And then you just update your website. So that's a really simple way to deploy a ready-made solution. You could do the same thing with Jenkins, for example. Jenkins, you could deploy that in less than 10 minutes. It's really quick. as well. And you can see here, this is using Deployment Manager. Again, this is infrastructure as code. This is basically going to deploy the instance. And well, that's interesting. Zone resource pool exhausted. Ooh. No kidding. North American, silly name. All right, so what has happened here is you can see here that it is saying that for some strange reason, they're out of this resource in Northern Virginia. So what I might have to do to get this actually deployed right is either try it again or deploy it like in Charleston or another zone. But basically the goal is I just want to show you here that this is basically what it's going to do is put together the YAML and the config work for you and just deploy it. Okay, so again, I'll just delete that. But again, for time purposes, I sort of want to move on. And I have this in a demo in the recorded class so you can see it. But if you ever see like not enough resources, or if it gives you like the region and zone, that just means that there's been an error on their side. And again, like I think I warned you, Northern Virginia and AWS and Google, it's like playing the lottery. You just never know if there's going to be resources available. So if you can pick another region or zone, I highly recommend it. So again, you go ahead and deploy that template again, however you want. And there's plenty of demos that I have on it in the other courses as well. Usually it's like a 5-minute process, but I don't want to waste any more time on it just because we have to look at a lot more. All right, so we get about 40 minutes or so, maybe. All right, now we know how to deploy a project, and we know a project is what? It allows us to maintain basically our resources, gives us a sandbox, and it also allows us to provide basically quotas and manage permissions and APIs, and all of that's also part of that. All right, now let's talk about storage. Now, for example, just like the other cloud providers, we have the ability to use object storage. Blob storage is another term that we might use. And Google's version of this is basically cloud storage. Now, what we want to do here, and the same thing in AWS, like yesterday when we had the folks on site here, we walked through like AWS storage and created buckets and all that as well. And it's almost the same process. So basically you create a bucket and you name, and it is a global namespace just like in AWS. So I don't want to call it bucket. And so as you see, someone else has that name. You can't name it bucket because it's a global namespace. So I want to be a little bit more creative, like let's call this the Tech Commander Demo 1. And chances are no one's probably got that name yet. So, and then labels. I could add a label, like basically identify what that bucket's for if I want. Helps with it helps with monitoring and also charge back as well. For time purposes, we're going to skip over that. Now, the bucket could be multi-regional, dual region, or just one region. In this case, let's just do one region. And then what I could do over here is I'm going to leave it at Charleston and leave it as that. And was that Charleston? I always confuse Charleston and Northern Virginia. It's 1 and 2, but anyways, whatever the point is. So anyways, sometimes again, just pay attention to what region you're in. Generally, I choose Charleston because it's physically and physically closer, and also the latency is usually a little bit better than like Iowa or Northern Virginia. But again, it's up to you to choose what makes sense in your deployment. So that's the location. So over here, pick whatever the region is that you want to select, okay? And then this is similar to AWS as well, where we have like different tiers of storage. I'm going to leave it as standard. Okay, now, do we want to have public access or not? Now, if we're going to deploy this like on, let's say for a website, an image generation service or something, maybe we want to open it up to the public. But if it's only meant for internal employees, then we probably don't want to, right? So these are things we have to plan for, right? So I'll just continue on with that. Protection. Do I want object versioning or retention? So for example, if I select retention, I could say retain, let's say this is PCI or HIPAA or GDPR, whatever it is. Let's say I need to retain this for 36 months. That means I'm not able to delete or modify the bucket's objects for 3 years. Now, you don't want to do this if you think you might have to delete it or remove it later. You want to know what your actual compliance requirements are. Try not to guess, because if you have to make changes later, support can help you, but generally the policy is they don't. So try to be cautious, right? Okay, so I'm going to leave it at none. And then encryption. Do I want to use my own keys, or do I want to use Google Cloud's own, own encryption built in? Now, just like S3, there's already built-in encryption that they use by default. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and create that bucket. Okay, so I have the bucket. Now, what do I want to do? I want to upload files to the bucket. Now, I could also create a folder. So a folder is sort of like presenting, similar to a NAS share, but it really isn't, because there isn't really a file structure in cloud storage or S3, for example. What we want to do is we could create a folder. So if we go over here, name a folder, whatever we want. So I'll call this demo 1. And in that folder, let's say I want to create a home directory or something. I go upload files to this and just take some graphics here. And then I just basically uploaded those graphics to basically this demo 1 folder. So when I go over here, you'll see a folder, and that's as simple as S3, right? Nothing harder than that. So there's a lot of similarities to S3. Now in Azure, we have things a little bit different. We need to create what's called a storage account. And again, just some differences, but there's a lot of similarities as well. So just be aware of that. Okay, now we go over here and go back to the console. And let's see, we probably want to talk about Kubernetes engine next. And let's go find GKE. So one thing too, I could search up here and go to it this way, or I could also go over here and scroll down to compute if I want as well. And again, I think I went by it, but anyways, no. Just so you can see, you have to slow down here. App engine, this is serverless, and then here is Kubernetes engine. Now, again, let me go over here just to save a few minutes, actually. Was it this one? What? Oh, wait a minute. Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay. I know what I did. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so I had that actually deployed in this one. Okay. Well, that's the strangest thing. I don't remember deleting anything. Okay, but anyways, you do need to enable the API. but in this project here, I know I had used GKE before, so not sure. Would be the first time that Google has made changes, and I read the announcements, but sometimes I don't. So maybe there is a reset or something that occurred. They're making you now change your permissioning or your API connection or whatever. So it wouldn't be the first time. Okay. So anyways, you just go over here, and what you want to do is, what this is doing is it's asking you what kind of credential you want to restrict the usage to. So basically, again, I could select any number that I want. I'm just going to go in this case, let's say cloud monitoring, and then I could select user data, application data, and then are you going to use this with like GKE, App Engine, Cloud Functions, and then go next, and then you just need to enable that. Okay, now there's a few things that we could do along with this, but for now, what we want to do is, since we enabled the API that we needed, we want to now go back to GKE and kick it off. All right, so run. Okay. Okay, so now we're able to deploy the cluster. I go to create. Now, they've made several changes in the last year to this interface. And I swear every time I look at it, there's something new. So it does look a little different, but it's really the same thing. They just, I think Google is realizing that maybe, you know, one way to keep people interested is just to, you know, change the console around every 2 months. And that's just what they do. So one of the things you'll notice is that they're like AWS in a lot of respects. Except for that, I think AWS, from my experience, from what I've seen, is they sort of warn you ahead of time. Like you'll see up at the top of the console, we have a new dashboard. Would you like to use it? Google, on the other hand, just sort of just rolls it out and, you know, lets everybody figure it out. So, all right. So in this case here, what we could do is standard. Now, what's cool is they have autopilot. So what this does is it lets you sort of deploy a really simple solution, so you play around and test on it. So I'm going to go to configure, because that's really where most of you will be if you're ever going to use GKE. And you can go over here and select basically the different configuration variables with GKE. Now, there's so many, and I have a course on a lot of these in the library that I gave you access to. It's a GKE course that'll walk you through a lot of this. But again, I need to update a lot of that because, you know, in a year and a half, they've changed 30 things already, it looks like. So, but overall, just be aware there's a lot of changes going on in this. All right. Now, metadata. So this is where I want to tag, right? And label what I need to label. Down here, I need to, like, for example, identify, do I want to use metering, for example? So metering is basically, gives us another viewpoint of how the usage is broken down as well. I could use image streaming, but over here, I'm going to leave it at default. And just go back to basics. So again, you can see there's just a lot here just in GKE. Now again, pay attention to the region that you're in. And Central, I'll probably deploy it in Central. I'm a little worried about deploying it in maybe, anyways, doesn't matter. Now, from a cost perspective, you know, the US regions are pretty much the same, but like if you were to choose Europe or Asia or South America, the cost would be about 20% more in a lot of regions. So just be aware of that. Okay, so over here, there's just a lot to talk about. I'm gonna just make it quick and just sort of say, you can specify like a default location. But for example, if you only want your basically clusters your nodes basically to be in one region or one specific zone, you can specify that right here. Over here, you could select a release channel or a static version. Now, what a release channel does is that this is going to allow you for basically any updates that has been put out with GKE to sort of have that automated. Now, if I go a static version, I'm just going to go with basically the static version, and then it's up to me to update these as needed. So it's sort of like, do I sort of trust Google to keep it right or do I not, right? Sort of your choice. I'm not saying either way is better. It's your call, right? So I'm just going to go create, and then again, I could use a command line or the REST API if I want. So that'll take a few minutes here to deploy. We're going to come back to that. And then you'll also notice, and I should see this, and this is a weird one. I'm starting to think something isn't right with this. Oh, I think they're having issues because that should be updating the console. The server was only able to, again, we looked at the status and it said everything's fine. Yeah, it's not an outage, but it's clear that something is not syncing up. Again, if you get an issue like that, sometimes it's nothing to do with what you're doing. It's a back-end issue, and you can put in a support call, or generally what happens is in an hour or two, it's just gone. You don't see it anymore. All right, now, while that's booting up, let's go to App Engine. All right, so App Engine is basically a regional service. So what we could do is basically deploy this. Actually, let me go to this region here where I haven't deployed it yet. And, okay, so over here I can go create application, and you can see this is a regional service. So App Engine is a service that developers would typically want to use to deploy runtime environments so that they could build and test their applications. It allows them to run an A/B test, allows them to run different versions, a lot of great capabilities. And then again, you want to select the region that you want to deploy in, and then it tells you like right there, Charleston, for example, and then you can select, for example, the service account. Then over here you go next. And then that'll configure the application. Again, that might take another minute, but for time purposes, I wanted to show you. And then over here, there's all kinds of different versions that you could deploy. When the instance comes up, when you set that up, that'll come up over here. There's also security scans built in. So the developers have quite a bit of capabilities built into this. All right, now let's go to GKE again. I just want to check to see if that's available finally. Okay, and oh, wrong project. This is really kludgy today. Usually it's a little bit smoother than this. Okay, let's go back. Okay, there it is. Oh, we're really slow today. Holy moly. Okay, so the status still, yeah, usually a cluster will be up and running within 3 to 4 minutes. Again, something's up. It seems like, because the status should be green. Okay, there it is now. Okay, and now we finally have the number of nodes. We have the amount of memory, 12 gig. And then I go into the cluster. This will show me the configuration that I want. And then I go over to workloads. Now you can see there's no workloads. That's because I haven't deployed a container. So I just deployed the cluster. And then what I want to do after that is I need to deploy basically my containers, my pods. I need to build it out, right? So all we did was just deploy basically the nodes so that I could run GKE. Now, there's also applications. So if there's an application running, it would pick it up. So I could go over here, for example, and then deploy this, for example, from the marketplace. So if I wanted to, I could go to Jenkins right now, and I can deploy Jenkins. Like right here, deploy on containers. Now, to use the container version, I need to have a cluster available. And I just deployed a cluster, so I have it available. So I'm going to configure that, and then you'll see over here, it'll pick up any clusters that it can deploy on. I'm just going to go ahead and deploy this. So the cost of this, like if I go down, is basically no cost. And then basically I'm just using the resources. So I'm just paying for the resources that I use. Okay, so that'll deploy. And then in the meantime, what I want to do is I'll go back to that in a few minutes. Let's go to Compute Engine. Okay, so if I go to Compute Engine again, let's see what has changed. Okay, you'll notice in Compute Engine, I now have that cluster deployed. GKE deploys the nodes on what service? Compute Engine. So I now have over here my 3 nodes that are effectively running the nodes in that GKE cluster. So again, really straightforward in that case. Okay, now, as far as refreshing, let's just refresh, make sure. Okay, and now just for the fun of it, remember always when you deploy resources at any cloud provider that you're not going to use, go ahead over and delete that. So you go over here and delete that. Also too, when you deploy an instance, there's also going to be, like in AWS, if you don't specify delete that, like in AWS, we have Elastic Block Store where it has a root volume. That root volume won't automatically delete if we, check save it, for example, whatever that term is. So just be aware that same thing applies in Google. Just because you delete the VM doesn't mean that that disk, that root volume, is going to be gone either. All right, so I'm going to refresh that, and now that's gone. Okay, so by now, I should be able to go over to GKE. And what I want to do now, and this is just really weird. Yeah, that should have kicked in by now. I mean, again, there is some weird issues going on that should have updated in the dashboard. All right, okay. But again, let me go into Stackdriver before we go and see what it shows there. Okay, now let's go down to Compute GKE again. All right, so the cluster's up. Let's go to workloads. Okay, so now you can see that I have under workloads, 2 workloads. I have the deployer, and then I have basically the stateful set, which is Jenkins 1. And then services and ingress. Again, you can see that I have my endpoints so that my development team can access Jenkins, for example. And then I go to applications. I then have basically the Jenkins app up. Now, it's still pending. This is really slow today, so just be aware. No surprise by now. But what we should be able to do is let's go over here to Jenkins 1. And you'll notice over here that there's an HTTP address. If I click on that address, okay, so the site is not fully up. It should deploy the Jenkins website so that I could log into Jenkins and get to work. That is not totally up yet. And again, so based on what we're seeing, you could see that it's still creating the ingress. And again, it's still a work in progress. But if I go over here to YAML, this is the YAML basically statement that was put together by Cloud Marketplace to deploy Jenkins. And this is the click to deploy solution. So it's still pending. Again, hopefully by the time we're done here, it'll be up and running so I can show you. But if not, you get the point. And again, I have demos on this as well. Okay, now let's go back and talk about SQL. So if I go to SQL, okay, maybe it was the other project. And again, I'm doing this so you can see that when I have different projects, I have totally different resources in each of the projects. Okay, so I have SQL up and running now. And again, this over here tells me, okay, so you can see on the right side here that the utilization of that is actually, there's only like 1.5% of the CPU is being utilized, okay? Not a whole lot, right? It's just idle, really waiting. It's waiting for, a queue, basically. Memory usage, read-write operations, and then log entries. So it is putting out log entries every couple of seconds with the status. So there is work going on, not a lot, but again, you can see that there is a SQL instance. Now, what I should see as well, and again, when I go back over here, this dashboard should be updating. So this is telling me that, again, it's not the application, it just doesn't seem to be updating the monitoring like it should. So you should see some kind of, again, you should see like a little chart graph here, whatever, updating, but it isn't. Again, something's going on in the back end. Now, what we can do as well is go over here to, let's talk about monitoring before before we talk about monitoring, let's go to networking. Let's talk about VPCs. So similar to AWS, we have what's called a virtual cloud. And it does pretty much the same thing. To create a VPC, we go ahead over here, create a VPC. And again, you have the ability to create a new subnet. You could use automatic subnetting, which is going to provide basically one subnet for each region in Google Cloud. The reason that we need a subnet for every region in Google Cloud is that it provides access, for example, for services like Compute Engine to access services in other regions. So again, now, on the other hand, maybe we want to have a custom subnet because we want to deploy, for example, our own CEDAR range in Google Cloud. We could also customize our subnet, for example, for a CEDAR range that we're going to use with on-prem, for example. So this gives us that connectivity from on-prem to Google Cloud. And we can also set up logging as well, flow logs. The problem with flow logs is they're going to use up a lot of resources if you don't manage them appropriately. So only enable them when you need them typically, but it is going to consume a lot of resources. Okay, so that's a VPC. Now, by default, Google deploys a VPC for you, and then you can deploy additional VPCs off of that. And in that default VPC, you saw that there's basically, a number, and let's just go show you again, just so you can see. So over here, you can see that there's 29 subnets. So basically, there's 29 regions, basically, by default, that it has deployed. And again, it's quite a bit. And then AWS, I think, has 32 regions, whatever that is now. I don't know, what do they have? It's usually one or two off, whatever that is today. 26, really? Is that correct? why did I think they had one more? Okay, I don't know. Like I said, it's been funny over the last 3 years, 4 years, seeing how Google had like half of what AWS has, and now it looks like Google's actually has more. Interesting. That is new to me because that wasn't true like even 6 months ago. So okay, so you can see right now that goes to each of the regions, each one of these. So again, that's just how you could tell, right? The number of regions real quickly. Okay, now when we go back, let's go to monitoring, and then I want to leave a few minutes for questions and then talk about the exam experience. All right, so what we want to do is go over to monitoring. Now, it's called operations. This was called Stackdriver like a year ago. They changed the name. So now it's called operations, so cloud operations. This is where I could go and set up my dashboard so I get a nice view. I could also, for example, create a dashboard just for SQL if I want. And then you can see here, it'll go ahead and show me under monitoring basically any information that I want. Now, what's cool about this is I can customize this any number of ways. I could also go over to metrics, and what I could do is basically go, let's say, to the database, and then basically customize metrics basically any number of ways. And I could filter that with labels, for example. Let's say I only want to monitor SQL one project only, let's say, or I could just basically, create a group, or I could add a tag, a label, I should say, and then monitor it that way. So again, there's, any number of things we could do in Google Cloud. Now I could set up alerts over here. And if I want, I just go over here and basically I could go to see incidents if there's any alerts. Then over here, I just create a policy. When I create that policy, I set up basically a condition to be alerted. So I could add a condition here. And let's say I want to look at GKE. Let's say CPU usage. And I'm just going to make it simple. Oh, I have to add a threshold. Yes, Joe. And then I'm going to filter that. Nah, probably leave it as that. Period. And then you can see how it actually updates. So like is above so much, 60 per second or per minute, or cycles, actually threshold in this type. For example, I should say is actually, let me change that to, anyways, I'll have to think about that. Anyways, you can see here, it just allows me to look at the cycles per second on like that CPU. So whatever condition is appropriate. A lot of that, you'll have to pay attention though to the processor type you selected for your nodes, and there's any number of variables, so you want to really think about that. But just as a quick example, I just wanted to throw that together. And then notification. I need to put together a channel here before I could set up the notification. For time purposes, I probably won't do that. But again, to do it is fairly simple. Is I go over here, and then I could select, for example, email, a webhook, Slack, cloud pub sub. Then I go put in an email here and then a name, right? And then after that, it would set up an alert and let me know that there's an issue. Again, fairly straightforward to do as well with that. Okay. And there's just so much more to go through. Just to talk about operations, there's actually one-day classes on this, so there's just so much to do with it. Now, uptime checks, you create uptime check. What that'll do is just make sure that your resources are available, for example, in a certain region. So like, if you want to be notified that cloud storage is down in Northern Virginia, I could set up an uptime check to sort of validate that. And then it is actually, you can now, this is fairly new. I could also use Prometheus as well. This is a monitoring product that's also available that could be used. Okay. As far as the exam, let's talk about that. I think from that perspective, I did want to point out a few things. And then if there's any questions, let me know, put in the chat. You're welcome to speak up if you want as well, whatever you want to do, and be happy to answer them. But let's talk about the exam experience first. And there's also, there used to be, but let me hold my mouth until I validate it here. What you could do is, right here, am I sharing my screen? Yes, I am. Over here is sample questions. Now, these questions were actually questions that were taken from the Google beta exam. So there's 20 questions. Basically, there's like 3 or 4 pages of like information they collect before you take the exam. But there's basically like 20 questions that you go through. So that's available for you to practice on. Now, those questions in the sample questions are actual beta questions. I know because I took the beta, and about 2 of them I sort of made comments on. I know that. So basically, those are taken out of the 100 questions. Now, this exam here, basically, and they updated this as well, is now basically over here. It's 90 minutes. There's 50, I think there's 49 questions. I don't know where they came up with 49 questions. It was like 50 or something, but I was told by a student that took it like 3 weeks ago that they only got like 49 questions. So I don't know what the issue is, and I don't know. Again, it's a moving target with Google, so just be aware of that. Okay, and they don't say the number of questions here, but it should be 50, but you might get 46, you might get 49. Let me know, because again, I took the exam, quite a while back, like 8-9 months ago, and they've already made some changes to it. So here's the exam guide. Now, once you take the exam, well, also to sign up for the exam, just go over here and you can take it online. Once you pay your $99, now you'll go over here to Criterion, which, is an experience to sign up with. I'll leave it at that. It's not like Pearson. It's a little bit different. But you'll see, though, like in Jacksonville, there's only 2 places to take the exam. And, this is a community college that's like only has testing like 4 hours a week or 2 days a week or whatever. And then if it's in the summer, they're not open. And then this place, I wouldn't go near if you paid me, just because it's like a rehab place. So that's okay. It was a weird, I went there once and it was really weird. Anyways, so that's really it. So if you take it in person, that's within 200 miles. So Daytona Beach, there's nothing in, Savannah. I mean, so it was tough to take some of these exams. Depending on where you're at, you may be able to sign up easily or not, but you can take it online now, which is good. So you could just sign up online and do that. Now, when you take the exam, you'll need to go in with your license. You'll need to check the testing center for requirements as well. In your area, you may need to wear a face mask or something. I don't know. It depends on where you're at. So you want to check those things. But anyways, if you go in, you're gonna sit down. They're going to, they don't give you actually a whiteboard or anything. At least with me, that was not the case. And then, so you'll walk in, you'll take the test. They'll get you loaded. You have to validate it's you, and then you'll just take the test. Now, when you go through the test, try to skip over questions that don't make sense to you, or it will be a little bit, might take you a little bit of time to figure out, and try to get the ones done that you can. Remember, and then plan before you submit it, of course, to go back and review those questions, because you can mark the questions and then go back. And then just answer those the best you can, because there's no harm in answering a question wrong. I mean, you will get it wrong, whether you answer it or not, of course, correctly. But don't skip over questions and not answer them. Give it a try, right? Charlie out if you can. So they're going to be multiple choice questions. And some of them will be like the architect exam. So some of them will be similar to that exam if you've taken that, where I showed you like some of the questions are like a paragraph, and you'll have to figure out what they're asking. Generally, if you know your content well, you'll go in and weed out 2 of the answers pretty quickly. Usually there's 2 that they have really close, and you have to think about it on what is the best answer. So once you do that, you'll submit, you'll know you passed or not. So once you pass, you'll get an email from Criterion saying, congratulations, you passed. But then it'll take like, typically, like in my case for this exam, it took like, well, I took the beta exam, so I shouldn't say that, because their process is to wait till everybody takes it, then they average out, the process. But with other Google exams, for example, what has happened, like with the cloud engineer or the architect, what will happen is you'll submit your exam, you passed, but then Google will go and review the answers and see if they could figure out if you cheated or not. And that's one of the reasons that Google changes their exams around, is because what has happened is that there are test dumps online, and they try to change it up every couple months, it seems, so that you might get 40 questions, 46 questions, and then 3 other different questions that are new that they, that no one's seen before. So that's the thing. So again, you'll get your certificate emailed to you, basically, and it'll be on, I think it's a Credible, and then you could download it and post it on LinkedIn. But that could take a week or whatever. Now, Google does give out swag, basically, once you get to the professional level exams. So with the digital leader and the associate cloud engineer, there's no swag or anything. At least that's the policy that I've seen lately. But when you take like a professional exam, you'll get the option and a link to go to like the Google store and pick out whatever they have available at the time, like a sweaty or, a shirt or a bag or whatever. So that'll be available for swag when you get to professional level certs. All right, any questions? All right, well, thanks for joining, Edgar and Rory. It looked like the other folks jumped off. With that said, if there's no other questions, I want to thank you for your time, and let me know if you do take the exam and any feedback that you have. All right, any questions? All right, thanks, Rory. Much appreciated. And Edgar as well.
Did you ever want to get into cloud computing? Becoming a cloud computing professional can lead to a career that is both financially and technically rewarding. The demand for cloud computing professionals is constantly growing, and companies are looking for these professionals in record numbers. Becoming a cloud professional does not require a college degree, and the best part is that entry-level roles are consistently available in less than 6 months of preparation. One of the best ways to get started is to get prepared with the best training and then prepare for interview with an experienced coach. TechCommanders is here to help you go from knowing nothing about cloud to a cloud superhero.
Join Tech Commanders and Cloud Interview Ace today. It will change your life.